Hey, greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 155th live stream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I missaid that. From the MisfitGamersStudios, I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode, we are going to do a deep dive into the history of enchanting. That is, the enchanting spell, enchanting weapons, creating magical items. Basically, we're going to talk about how it's evolved over all of the editions, from 1st edition all the way to 5th edition. This is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart in terms of the old style of gameplay versus new style of gameplay. This is definitely something that is definitely one of those banner moments of why Vortex like 2nd edition. And that's simply because enchanting was such a much deeper and richer concept, in my opinion, way back when. 3rd edition was probably the closest to perfection. I kind of like a blend of 2nd and 3rd myself. Obviously, because that's usually what I do for these things. But yes, we're going to go through it all. We're going to go through everything on how they used to do it, what the lore was, what the impact on gameplay was, how you did it, the limitations of it, and what you can pull off with it. So I hope you all are interested in this journey because it has been a minute since I've been so excited to do a history of. But I think we were just talking about something. I don't know. Do we have updates or was that just stuff going on in Discord?
No, we are having a lot of very cool activity in the Discord.
I do have to check the poll, actually. So we have a poll out for the community stream. So February's community stream is going to be Saturday the 26th? 22nd. Saturday the 22nd. Put it on your calendars. We have the Misfit Gamers community stream. It is going to be a subletting subclass. That was what was voted on.
Okay.
I am right now going to check on where the vote is on which class we're going to do.
Oh, that's right, because wasn't the rogue subclass leading last we checked?
Yes, it was. So if you want to join this vote, go ahead and join Discord. Link is in chat right now. I am going to head over there right now to the community streams channel under the Misfit Gamers Studios category, and we are going to take a look here. Subletting subclasses got 3 votes out of 6, beating out critical cocktails and pop culture builds. For this, we have 2 options for the community to vote on. We have the Gloom Stalker, which is a ranger subclass, and they want us to turn it into a rogue.
Okay.
Or do they want us to do a Rune Knight, which is a fighter subclass, and turn it into a warlock?
All right.
And it is fascinating. You brought up a good point last stream, too. It's interesting. The very first one that we ever did, the Echo Knight, which we turned into an Echo Assassin, was a fighter to rogue. So that's very interesting. It's either fighter to warlock or ranger to rogue. So way to split the split the party there.
Exactly.
We have 9 votes.
9 votes? Okay, that's more than last
3
time.
more. That's 3 more already. Okay, let us see what is the results. As of right now, with 9 days left and 9 votes, Rune Knight, fighter to warlock, has 6 votes to 3.
Oh, wild.
So we may, that's 9 days is a long time and we got plenty of people ready to vote. But if you have not voted, get in there. 9 days left to figure that one out, and then we will figure out which of these.
Very interesting.
But it does sound like right now, Rune Knight just might take it.
Okay.
Have you voted?
I have voted.
So you did.
I'm part of the reason
Vixie
why.
voted. So the 2, what I like to call the swing votes.
Listen,
because
not all the time, because
I don't allow myself to vote.
Theoretically, there's still if her and I had not voted, it would still be up, right?
I know, like I said, I just like to call you guys the swing votes because y'all are, y'all are mods, but yet you guys get to vote. So there y'all are.
At least we're not the one creating the poll. I think that makes sense.
Exactly. That's why I these are the options that I'm going to go with. So it doesn't matter what my vote is. All right. So anything else going on in Discord? I think that was the big one. I know there's a lot going on in homebrewing right now.
Yes, homebrewing is blowing up, and I love that that's blowing up.
I am so happy we made that one.
Yeah,
I forget whose idea that was. I think it was your idea to split that and put one in there for the community.
For like development. Yeah.
Soul, you tagged Kage in something. You have
yes
or
are you
no?
in chat right now?
Was that just a like this or that question? Were you literally just wanting him to blindly say yes or no?
Yes,
or did
I was
you
curious
have
about that.
A very specific, because I know that there was a lot going on in that chat for a minute, so I didn't know exactly where it was what was happening.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But you need Kage to blindly answer.
Oh, that was just okay. So
was
if you're ever gonna
straight
do
up
that,
yes or no.
So if you're gonna do that, y'all at least like in parentheses put this or that, so at least we understand what you're saying.
That's
because
fair.
if it's a yes or no, we literally talked about it. We're like, well,
I can give you a
there's a
quick yes
lot
or
going
no.
on, you know, like in chat. Which question was he supposed to answer? So put this to
Whatever,
that,
it's
and we'll
fine.
totally understand what it is for. All right, yeah, no, I'm really happy with how everything's gone with the Discord so far.
P.S. My answer is always yes. I'll put it in the Discord for you. I feel like Jim Carrey and Yes Man, just walking around having to say yes to everything.
Ooh, Cart has so much more to give you
Oh,
to convert. Apparently, they're just waiting to see how the first one
okay.
goes about it.
I'm very excited.
So we have one slotted for Monday, but I believe the following Monday is when we're going to try to slot the newest.
That is correct.
There you go.
I was gonna say if you are new to the submission process, I will get you through hopefully as soon as possible, because I like to have a good rotation of like all the people who like to send me consistent things like Pokeniner, like Hecate. You know, like I always have certain people in the way. Cosmic, especially. You know, I swear Cosmic is our longest running submitter. Like it's wild.
Still submitting to this day.
Yes, indeed. But I'm happy to see what you got. I saw the initial submission and it looks clean so far. I don't think I'm gonna have much trouble putting it in a decent format. So much appreciated, and I will let you know when I get a little bit closer to finishing that.
Yeah, I will say that the longer we do this, I think at the first chance we get to add a stream day that's not a weekend, because I definitely want to keep weekends for much larger projects.
Sure.
But I'm pretty sure if we get a chance to add a third stream day during the week, you know, whether it's weekly or just, you know, once or more a month, I really would like to start adding in more homework. I think that would be the best move, because we are getting so much.
Yeah.
And we're not getting any more time during the day. You know, if we could, start at 4 o'clock,
Sure.
maybe we can get 2 in a day. But at this point, the way I'm looking at it is, if we could, even every other week or even just once a month, do an additional weekly stream where we knock out another homebrew, I think that's how it would have to work.
That would be kind of cool. I wouldn't be mad at that.
We have so much. I'd like to get through more, and I don't want to discourage people from submitting because they feel like it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's either that, or what we start doing is, depending on how many people we have, we just start doing like a spin wheel system where we spin person's name and then we spin one of their items.
Oh,
and then we have to go through a couple more names before they get added back to the wheel. So at least that way, you know, everyone gets a fair chance at it.
That's kind of fair. That's kind of legit.
All right. So I'm really excited about this topic. I don't know about you. I don't know how much thought you as a DM have ever put into the concept of enchanting. And by enchanting, we don't mean like glamour or anything else like that. Enchanting in the terms of magical weapons, enchanting items, enchanting weapons, enchanting armor, you know, whatever.
Tangible magic.
Yeah.
Like something that you can touch, create, imbue, whatever you want to call it, however you want to describe it. It is a physical object.
So
that is
what is your definition? Like, I'm curious. So let's start out with like, what is when you think of enchanting, what is either your definition or your inspiration? When you think of D&D specifically, and I say enchantment or enchanting, because obviously Magic the Gathering is going to be a different story, right? Enchantments are actual things. But in the concept of D&D, is enchantment, enchanting, enchant, are those all synonymous, or how do you break out this vocabulary?
A lot of things are, you know how in Doctor Who they got the wibbly wobbly timey wimey? That's kind of how certain terms are with me. I think you asked me about something. I swear it was like somebody's homebrew, or we were talking about something, and you asked me like how I defined a certain word, and I believe my response was something akin to like all of these different things. It has something to do with like a sorcerer, I swear. Oh, because there was a monster called an ice sorcerer that we just reviewed.
Right. The concept of sorcerer.
Yes. And so it was like, why not just use like mage or magic user?
Why use the term sorcerer? There was a kind of a conversation about that.
There is a lot of things that there's a lot of different terms you could use to kind of mean the same thing in my world. And so like just the idea of putting magic in an item, because I know there are other forms, like you can do like an enchanting spell on a person, but like I'm not considering that.
Kind of like the school of magic, the concept of the school, like
yes,
that's
because,
an enchanting spell.
Yes,
Gotcha.
yes.
Okay.
And so like the entire idea of being able to, because like I would say yes, enchanting, but also like imbuing, right? Like that's another terminology that I would say is very similar or like along the same lines. Like
right.
I am going
I'm glad
to
you brought that one up because I want to talk about that one.
Magic into this thing, like that is like, now however you go about doing it, kind of like you were talking about when I asked you about the artificer, right, and how they go about doing these types of things, like they understand what's magical about the thing and find a way to use it, versus like casting a spell into, like literally like you said, you open it up and you cast magic into it and then you zip it up again afterwards. Like that was like the picture I got in my mind as you were describing it last time. So like that's what I'm thinking of, is like any way you get this thing that either is innately,
your mentality is a transfer of magic pretty much into an inanimate object, whatever that means, or however that, whatever the end result, regardless.
I'll say a transforming or even a shaping.
Okay.
Like
I'm
magic already exists in the thing, and
you're bringing it out in a different way.
Yes.
Right. But okay. So that's great. That's a lot larger than I think my definition typically is. Because I'm not huge on the idea of it being like a class type, like being type of enchanting magic, right? I'm not really big on that. I much prefer those to be categorized as illusionary or psychic, which is again one of the reasons why I really miss psionics. I have heard rumor. Someone on TikTok made mention that they're bringing psionics back to 5th edition.
They've tried weird things with,
I don't know if it's something.
Points,
I don't know if it's coming back. I still think we need to do ours.
I 100%, regardless of what comes back or not.
Exactly.
We need to do that.
But I feel like one of the reasons why I really like psionics and why I want it to be brought back is not just the idea of psionics as a class and a subclass as a power, but I feel that when you have certain types of magics, I feel like things like telekinesis, pyrokinesis, all of those, powers essentially that derive from psionics, right? Like the idea of powers of the mind. And manipulating things without having to worry about material components and gestures and words. And this is it's almost like on the level of a sorcerer meets a monk, right? It's just happening in your head, not your body, not your outside. So when I think about that, and I think we're kind of missing this generalized idea of like we have psychic damage, but we don't have psychic magic. And that's why I think psionics would be a great fit in 5th edition, because you could open up, right? You can basically open up not just psionics, but open up a whole new understanding. You could put telekinesis back in, you could put it, to me, that belongs in like a psychic domain, right? Some of the illusionary spells like charm could even go into, right? Like what you would, I guess, call enchantment, like in terms of the class or the the class of magic. I really think that could be its own derivative. So in that respect, I'm not a big fan of calling it that, because for me, enchantment and enchanting things, kind of like a little bit like what you were saying. I definitely think of it as more of, again, words are weird for me. Imbuement is like a step below that, right? Usually I look at imbuement as temporary. You know, like
I can get behind that.
Like a cleric giving you guidance. They are imbuing you with the ability to do it one time.
Okay.
Right? Being able to cast a spell once per day. Or a cleric getting the imbued, like their deity imbues them with the ability to have magic until they pray again, until the next day, right?
Sure.
I think typically when I look at the word imbuement, I think of things like artificers being able to infuse, imbue.
Right.
Those two are synonymous. Infuse and imbue. Infuse to me is synonymous with imbue when it comes to magic, but obviously infuse has its own connotations. But infuse and imbue in terms of magic, I kind of look at hand in hand. You're giving something but it's not permanent, right?
Right.
That's why I like the idea of enchanting, because enchanting to me is the like inputting the action, not just temporarily like encasing something or infusing it, right? This is the actual, I'm permanently going to put, or not necessarily always permanent, but I'm going to put something in here, right? And that's typically going to be a little bit more, right? So my envisionment of enchanting is more than making something just slightly more powerful. It's usually allowing something to do magic, or to permanently give it a magical property. That's my definition of enchanting. When I think of enchanting an item, it is a temporary or permanent manipulation to provide something a magical ability, right? Again, more than just a small one-time infusement. This is, I mean, it can be one time, right? But step up from the actual power level, like what it's actually doing. And that's this is much more of the old school role play aspect of the older editions, because it was much harder to enchant things early on. And we've kind of lost that. We've kind of realistically lost the idea of creating magical items in game. That's really not even available. Well, it is, but it's not really a thing in 5th edition anymore.
It's not. Like the closest thing you get is replicate magic item as an artificer to like actually innately just being able to like, boom, I have a magic item. But those are like standard magic items. It's not like you get to customize this magic item that is mine and only mine. It's literally one of a kind because I just created it and invented it right here and now.
But that's usually a mechanical build, not like, it's very rarely like an in-game like process or system.
But that's my point. Like that doesn't exist in 5th edition. Like that being able to actually create your own thing doesn't exist.
Not real. Not like systematically, not mechanically. Yeah.
Yes,
that's
not
what
mechanically.
That's what we're gonna go into.
Yeah.
So and that's the thing, is like for me, when it comes to enchanting, I've always kind of loved the idea of enchanting being this idea of taking magic and putting it into something and giving it the ability to do something.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so what's Cart talking about? So enchantment tuning, the process of increasing an item innate magic ability of an item. I think that's kind of what you were considering, right? The idea of manipulating something that may already have magic.
Yes, that's another aspect that I believe.
And again, I don't really look at that as enchanting. It already, again, for me, enchanting is the process of giving or like basically providing more, boosting.
Right.
The idea of taking something that's already in there and just manipulating it, to me, is a different like sphere. It can be under the same.
What would you call that?
We'll see. I call that either, well, not really spellcrafting, because that's more on the actual like spell magic aspect of it. So that's to me more or less what I imagine artificers do. When we've talked before about how I envision artificers, that they see the magic potential in things and they understand how the pathways work. So whereas any other magic user may just see an item that has magical potential, an artificer can do kind of this idea of enchantment tuning, where they actually can use it with something else and unlock its potential to get it to do something else nobody else could. That's, in my mind, what artificers are doing. Is it's, being given a whole bunch of parts that nobody knows what to do with, and you can put them together into a functional tool.
Interesting.
And that can include giving it magic or seeing that it has magical potential. It just, no one knows how to get to it. But you're like, but if I put it with this item and I activate it in this way and I bump this item with a little bit of magic, again, to me, I always look at artificers dealing with magic in a way that like you deal with electronics. Some people can be given a computer and you're amazing with a computer, but can you build one from scratch? Artificers to me are the people that can, build a ham radio out of a bunch of car parts, or
MacGyver.
Yeah, or they can make a shotgun out of an old bicycle. Like, in my opinion, this is what they do with magic. They can see parts that to you and me are just mundane or junk, or that could be like, we could see a pipe and go, well, I could imagine something going through it. But for you and me to go take the steps to turn that into a working, say, pistol, completely different than someone who just goes, oh yeah, you just do ding, 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 boom, you got a bullet, works. That's to me what an artificer does. They're the tinkerers of the magic world. They don't look at it like most people do. They just look at it as they know how to get it out, but it's not like they're talking to the magic. It's not like they're feeling the magic in the sense that other magic users are. They just, to me, it's more of a sixth sense.
Why does it give me like You ever watch in the Iron Man movies where he's like taking his little 3D model and just like moving everything around? Like it's
Yeah.
giving me like that type of like, all right, I can see like inside of this, like this is how this magic is working. This is how these wires are flowing. Like they're almost doing like some really jerry-rigged like computer building, like hook this computer to that computer.
And that's essentially
like,
what I imagine. Again, that's exactly how I imagine it. That's why I always imagine artificers aren't these like amazingly smart wizards. They're just these people who are kind of estranged and tinker because their mind just works different. They see the world differently. And I love that. I love the idea that it's more of a science than it is this intangible magic.
right.
You know? And again, I like to play with that idea because to me, I believe artificers should be able to, because again, I hate the idea, this general concept in D&D, at least over the years that I feel D&D has done, where it slowly blurred the edges of a lot of the classes. Like, again, we've talked about this, spellcasters.
Right.
There is so lack of definement between spellcasters nowadays, whereas to me,
They all just feel like different spell versions of
yeah, and it's like to me there need again it's not just about the mechanics. Yes, they have different spell lists. Yes, they can do slightly different things, but to me it's a feel, right? It's an approach. It's all about the lore and how they go about magic, right? You know, the idea, because how many people truly play a sorcerer with the mindset that it just comes naturally? And I don't mean arrogance, always just being like, oh, wizards
Yeah.
have to study, but I mean the idea of like, do you ever just, you know, play the existential crisis of what does it mean? You know what I mean? Or play a character that it comes naturally, but they're trying to discover like how to control it better. You know what I mean? Most people just like, I want to be a sorcerer because I like their list and I don't want to have to prepare. Right? And that's kind of why
I like a lot the idea of sorcerers almost feeling like X-Men. Like
Yeah.
the kids that are growing up that they just have this power and they like don't necessarily understand it. They're trying to figure it out, get it under control, have it stop hurting them or others or whatever the case may be. So
Right? Yeah. How many times does a sorcerer have a backstory where they hurt, you know, a sibling or a childhood friend and they
Right.
ran away because they're like, I had to run away because I couldn't control my power. Like that would be, and then imagine having a druid in the party and they're like, yeah. And then I met him in the forest and I was like, I got you. I won't, if you burn down my forest, I'll kill you. Don't worry about it. And then they became part of the party and then they met the other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's so much part of why these characters work. I mean, we talk about that, right? It was the TikTok I post or I tagged you in, you know, just today. Like, it's the idea that, you know, some people don't believe the dice tell the story. It's like they do tell the story, but just as much as the addition, just as much as the lore that you're working with, tell the story, right? I saw this other TikTok that it's like I had to post and disagree with because he was talking about how players don't care about your lore. They don't care how much detail you put into it. And they don't care about your setting. They don't care about anything of that. And so they were trying to talk about how to like get players to, you know, like be more engaged. And I'm just like, and I was like, I disagree with you simply because players don't care about your lore when it either does not apply at all to the gaming session or the campaign, or it does not directly affect what they can do and or they can't affect it. See, these are the things I've learned, right? High Point's huge. Y'all know this. Like we've talked about High Point. But Kage can tell you how little I actually give, you know, expletives on the greater High Point, right? I don't talk about the Kingdom of Latrice. I don't talk about the Kingdom of the Mist. I don't talk about the Valley of the Four Nations, right?
Sure.
These are not areas that we discuss in great detail. You know, roughly, because you've asked questions about how the society is, and we've gone over the basic questions unless you wanted to dig down. But because you don't directly get affected by that and you can't affect it directly, and it does not directly impact your gaming session and or campaign, I don't try to indulge you with that, because to me, while that's all fascinating to me, what can you do with that information, right? What I do is I want to figure out what people want to play as, and then I drop them in a world and give them all the information they need to know to start playing, and then let them figure out, let them touch everything.
And I think that is what makes it so much more attractive, is you allow them to go get it. Like it's there for you if you want it. I'm not going to shove it down your throat. I'm not going to make you be excited about it, right? It's like you made a movie and you're walking these people through your movie and you're like, don't you like my movie? And I'm like,
exactly.
I'm like, I want to go explore. Like, I want to be in Skyrim. I want to go see what's under this bridge. I want to go into the sewers and find some shit. Like I want to be able to feel like there's a reason for me to be here other than just watch your story.
And it's fine if, again, if it's semi-linear, that's fine. But that's where, again, I've seen this take where people are like, they don't care about your homebrew. I'm like, people do. The problem is you're not introducing it correctly. You know what I mean? This is the same thing where it's like, I have a hard time if I go to a gaming session and the person wants to spend like any more than 5 minutes. And I mean this honestly, if you give me more than 5 minutes of background in your realm, I stop listening. Because there's absolutely no way that all of this is going to apply, because you can't be expecting me to take notes on what you're just talking about, right? And again, 9 times out of 10, you tell me about the kings, you tell me about the lore, the emperors and the gods, and all of the diplomacy and all of like factions. And then you're like, cool, you're in a bar on the outskirts of town where none of that matters and you can't talk to any of those people for at least 9 levels. Then why did I need to know all that? Like, no offense, It's not that it's bad. I'm amazed that you have that story and I want to explore it. Believe me, I am the kind of player that I want. If you tell me there's a king in there and there's a rumor that his advisor is evil, I want to go figure out what's happening. But what I don't want to be told is it's important, so play the game until you can get there, right? It's like those games that are like 40, 50, 60 hours long, and at the very beginning, they give you a snapshot of the ending, and they're like, grind until you get back here, and you're like, no. Like, that's not enticing to me, right?
Right.
What's enticing to me is giving me a reason to, tell me that the reason why I'm starting in jail is because my family used to be nobles and they used to be close to the king. And ever since this new advisor came in, my family and half the people have been shunned. And now we have to figure out what this advisor is trying to do. Maybe he's trying to take over the kingdom and all that kind of stuff, right?
Sure.
That could be an amazing way to start out your campaign of why you're in a dungeon. Like, you know what I mean? Like maybe you escaped, a slaughter, or maybe, like you had some sort of reason to now be intrigued in the king and all of that, right? That's what I want in terms of a storyline. What I don't want is to be fed a bunch of stuff that when I start playing doesn't directly affect any of my decisions. And no matter what, just plays out the same way.
Right.
Like I am not going to be enticed by that. I'm not going to remember it. You know what I mean?
I'll say if you've been playing with some people for a while and like there's either like a big reveal or something like that, I can see a significant amount of information coming out. But again, that's all because it's supported by the experience the players have had up until that point.
There should be build up.
Right? Yeah. And like, it's not going to be something that you're not going to expect. It's not going to like hit you out of nowhere. It's like, you're likely here for that, or you're like reading a book and somebody's trying to like, you're trying to get information for something. But again, that kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about wanting to be able to seek it out. So like if I did want some information about the 4 nations, or if I did want some information about Latrice or any of these other nations that are out here, like I can go investigate for it. It's not like that information is bad to have, but when you try and make it important just because you want to say it, like it's hard. It
could be important to the DM, but it's the same thing with like names. When you drop names and expect people to remember, be like, oh, well, he's actually the subordinate of dun 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 such and such commander, and you're like, okay, and they're like, but such and such commander is potentially at odds with him. Who's he? Well, he's the guy who is the boss of the one who sent you on this mission. And it's like, so his boss is an enemy to a guy that our guy's boss know. You know what I mean? Like, that's what, because I've been in gaming sessions where they're trying to explain all of this, and half the party's like, who is this guy? And they're like, remember you talked to this guy and it was his boss, and then this guy over here I told you about earlier, and then so he's partnered with him, which means he actually is evil and against him over here, so this is probably like the evil guy. He would remember that conversation you had, this is probably the guy they were talking about. I'm like, no, I don't remember any of that. I'm sorry, because that was 9 gaming sessions ago, before any of us knew that we were even involved. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you started us off in a tavern killing rats, but you know, and for some reason that led to us meeting a guy and getting hired to take this cart across town. And now you're telling me that this guy is like, that's what I can't stand, is like, now, if I could find all of that out, if the assistant, if you could tell me like, oh, the assistant that's giving you this, he looks worried, and well, what's going on? It's like, oh, I think my boss is like having some shady dealings. Just be very mindful if you see this, general in this uniform. Oh, okay. And then you meet, you know what I mean? Like, let me decide if I want that intrigue. But when you try to bake it in and then you don't understand why no one's catching on, it's like, did you plant the seeds or did you just give us everything and expect us to remember?
Yeah.
Big difference between planting seeds and letting people put the picture together or put the puzzle together versus I gave you everything. If you would have just remembered it all, you would have understood.
Which is, I'm not gonna lie, I honestly feel like why I have chosen to go the route of my players. I don't like pre-plan out what my players are gonna do or where they're gonna go or what they're gonna do. Like, it's just, you go do what you want to do, you go explore, and you go see what unfolds as a result of that. Now, again, things do have consequences, and I will calculate out what happens as a result of your actions, but it's always going to be a result of your actions, and it's always going to be very directly tied to you. And if you like put something into your backstory, like, that's going to be like, those ripple effects are going to exist, they're going to be out there. And most of the other things that I put in, very similar to you, if you understand, if you think back, like, would it make sense that this person would be here? Not too long ago, we were talking about the toast religion and how there are other people that interact with the toast religion that had nothing to do with this gaming group because those ripple effects still exist. And so
it's going to grow.
Like, you'll see all these things, but it's not something that, like you said, is pre-planned out, is like set up for you. Like, this is how it's got to be. Like, I need you to recognize this thing in order. But it's just gonna be, you're gonna see you reflected back in the world around you. And I think that hopefully is something that people actually want.
Oh, absolutely. What do we got from Jet? So where does the line of enchantment and science cross the line? Because to our past, what we have would be magic. Totally understandable. Sure. So in D&D, I'm sure there's a lot of different ways that you can answer that question. In High Point, the line crosses. It's actually a fun story. Actually, that's a very fun story for High Point's like greater history in terms of where the line is drawn between real science and actual magic. And the primary line is drawn in the general application, obviously, in terms of when you're thinking of enchantment, right? You're still dealing with magical energies, and magical energies have a tangible origin, right? You're literally taking it from somewhere.
Sure.
Whereas you think about like electricity, usually you have to generate that. You have to create it. It's not from nothing. There's a science behind it, right? But specifically for the purposes of High Point and its lore, science isn't the problem. Like, the actual concept of science isn't the problem, which is hilarious because there's kind of a confluency there. Because in one respect, in High Point, magic and the use of magical tools gets so elaborate that from a player point of view, if you were to look inside the game, the magic gets so complex that it's indistinguishable from our technology.
Right.
Like, there's entire magical spaceships powered by crystals and gems and magic that basically work exactly like Star Trek. Like, think about the Enterprise, but there's no science. It's all magic that powers it.
Right.
So
interesting.
It would be indistinguishable tool to us. We would go on that ship and go, so it's science. But no, it's the origin, how you craft it, how it works is all based in magic. But again, it's not in High Point due to Zenith's past, his very elaborate past that even goes beyond High Point.
Sure.
Due to things that happened there, he has some scarred memories. He has some things that he just can't let go.
Sure.
And part of that is a potential future that he once saw. One that he's extremely terrified of. One that he believes is just kind of his version of the apocalypse.
Well,
and it was
this is our Discord.
But no, so this was a future that he once saw long before he ever came to High Point. This was back when he was immortal.
Okay.
And he saw a potential future without magic that had been completely taken over by science due to someone who, at the time that he knew in his past, was fascinated with science, like was fascinated with this idea that there was this other way to do things that wasn't magic based. And come to find out that when he found out this alternate future is if this person had succeeded and gone mad and crazy and evil and done all the things that they wanted, all magic was going to be completely wiped out. So since then, back then, there was this big deal of can't ever let that happen. But then obviously shit happened. Right. He's now in his own place. But of course, due to the anomaly and due to his relation, so he's gone there. He's had his conversation.
So this person has nothing to do with the anomaly.
Zenith?
No, the person that could have gone crazy.
Oh yeah, no. That's from the old world. That's from his previous life. That's prior High Point. That's prior Cataclysm. That's mortal Zenith. That was mortal version of him long before he ascended, before High Point ever became a thing.
Before he was even Zenith.
Before he was Zenith. That was my first character, had that experience while he was still mortal. So he vowed to make sure that never happened. But again, things have happened. Zenith is now where he is. So with that being said, though, and considering the anomaly, imagine Zenith's, confluence when he has High Point now to his control. He still has this fear, but
has Zenith actually ever been to the other side of the anomaly?
Oh, of course, yes. Took him a long time to figure it out.
Okay.
Very long. But when he did, obviously he had a time dealing with, the idea, but that idea also goes actually hand in hand with one of the original ideas for him. So this is kind of where real life starts to blend, right? Because everything I do in High Point is kind of a reflection of
sure
how I've evolved as a player. So when I originally ascended, and we were given our concepts of an afterlife, right? Because as you ascend, you have to have an afterlife, you have to get followers, blah blah blah. I originally wanted to map mine off of that book, right? The Apprentice Adept series, and specifically because I loved phase and the mindset of it, so I wanted to kind of make mine look like that. But because of the issue with not wanting technology and science to take over, part of the reason was now that I had this expansive space that's eternity's big, and I can do anything I want.
Sure.
I wanted to create a place where I could secretly research the potentials and how this could take over science, or how this could basically ruin magic.
Sure.
So I wanted to basically do my own research to figure out what they were doing. So my plan was to make an afterlife, and in my afterlife, I was going to hide this whole extra dimension of technology. So I was going to base my afterlife off of how phase and proton are.
Right.
I was going to hide a little basic, a technological universe inside my afterlife, inside my God plane, just so I could try to understand how that future was going to happen.
Because if you can understand it, you can control it
or stop it, or at least predict it. So that was the whole plan. When I very first ascended, the first thing I was doing when I was creating my afterlife was modeling it after phase and proton from the Apprentice Adept series, so I could secretly have basically like a secret lab, hidden and also safe, because it was under so many different layers. If anything happened, it wouldn't be able to escape in my mindset, right? So it was like, this is just going to be my little laboratory of discovery. So fast forward, that's the player's mindset. So fast forward again, I get the idea of what's going to happen with High Point. So the High Point's the thing that has the anomaly, which can explain how big it is, right? So then I get to the anomaly. The anomaly is the actual,
anomaly.
It is actually phase, right? It is actually like the concept of being able to merge into phase. And then of course it has the real technology place. So it's not so much like Zenith is like, I didn't put it in the lore like Zenith's like, oh my God, this is what I had created. It was just more of a, wait, so that's actually real technology on the other side of that curtain. And he was terrified and yet fascinated, because he knew that getting in here was already a problem. So getting out, plus once he learned from Blue, like how things can and can't cross, he was like, okay, that's chill. But he was just fascinated with the idea that there was stuff there. So,
No, I know Zenith's power works different in phase, but I'm curious how it works or doesn't work on the other side.
he had a fun time experiencing that. But he was able to cross. And I even have lore reasons why.
Wild.
It's great when you can tie all of this in. It's so fascinating when you can tie
Very much
so
so.
many things in. But anyway, so when he went there, obviously seeing that, experiencing it, and kind of just being able to understand it, obviously, this is also what kind of built him to the mindset of like, it's already like that future isn't necessarily something he can prevent. It's just something that he can choose not to experience. Like I've always
Okay.
told you, like he kind of
Yeah.
had to get to a different mindset where he still made that vow, he still made that oath, but he's kind of come to a different understanding about what that oath means.
Yeah.
Not only is he never be able to go back, so he can't really keep the oath that he originally kept, plus he has a version of himself that's technically doing what it can to keep the oath. But the mindset of after going to Proton, after seeing it again, and it isn't his first nor his second time seeing a world without magic.
Right.
So having noticed that, it's like his concept was, no matter what I do, it will exist. Kind of like the Eternals, right? The
Sure.
concept is, no matter what I can do, that future isn't so much a future as it is an existence throughout all
Sure.
right? It will be no matter what. So therefore, his mindset was, I can choose never to experience that. I can choose never to allow that to happen as long as I'm in control. So High
Okay.
Point is a bastion of magic. And because of this mental scar, while many things diverge into the realm of what we would look at as science and technology, there is definitely a very fine line and several blockades in place to ensure that technology can never become powerful enough to rival magic. And that is just the decree, as Zenith has seen it, is because he's understood at this point, his oath, the only way he can live his oath at this point is to choose never to experience it.
Okay.
Because the only thing he can do is just choose not to let it take over High Point. Right? It's going to exist wherever, right? It exists in Proton.
Sure.
It can exist in that one potential future. And now he understands time differently. Like, it's not like he can wipe out everything in all versions of existence. So all he can do is not allow it to happen here.
Okay.
So answering Cart's question a little bit more is, the divergent line is primarily source and how it functions, but there is a definitive line where technology will meet roadblocks that the standard mortal will either not understand or not be able to overcome. Certain things just will not be able to be allowed because the forces of magic hold slightly more sway and are given priority.
Can he make it so that even other gods can't do that?
That's how it is. Well, again, there's lots of rules and regulations in place. There's a lot of things involved. They can attempt, but it would be against the rules, and doing so is punishable. So, again, just like the hierarchy of everyone has responsibilities, again, everyone has also, like, again, even no matter how much conflict there is between the gods, they are all of there to do a job, and regardless of what their specific, like sphere of influence is, everyone's job is to keep High Point.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point is to keep everyone alive. You know what I mean? Like, you may not like another god. You may want to take over their power. You may want that god to die. But overall, if push came to shove,
You
we
need High
all
Point
want
to keep function.
Yeah. If there is no High Point, none of us function. So
Yeah.
that mindset behind, certain things are off limits. I mean, there was 3 Great Wars for a reason. Like, people got put into place a little bit, right? They basically, they've learned what happens when you try to push back, and Zenith won.
This is slightly off topic, but it's on my mind, so I have to ask
Posture
the
check,
question.
thank you.
Oh yes, please, thank you. It's on my mind, so I have to ask the question. But the first thought that comes to my mind is, like, does that mean like a god? Because in order for there to maintain the balance, like, somebody needs to fulfill that role. Like, someone needs to be able to do that thing. And I'm assuming, at least to a certain extent, a god could absorb another god's responsibility
Mhm.
and take
Happens.
it on to themselves. is there a cap to that? Is there an amount of responsibilities that is too much for one god to have? One entity to have, whatever you want to call it? Like,
It depends on who you ask, and it depends upon what you mean by too much. Because if you think about it, that is Zenith. Zenith is everything. He calls all of the shots. But just like any good business owner, as the business grows, it's nice to delegate. So is there technically a limit? No, because Zenith is the limit. Zenith could reabsorb everybody, and that would be it. If he truly needed to, he would be, well, wouldn't be as easy as snapping his fingers because the Saints are kind of on their own now. Like, he allowed them to stay their own. But
Sure.
for the most part, like, I would say the vast majority of gods, Zenith could just blink out of existence or absorb instantaneously without a thought. Like, he could reassert himself. The point of delegation is that things run smoother, because it's kind of like the idea of, like, you can be omnipotent, but you can't be everywhere at once. Like, you can know everything, but it's still like a computer. You can only access so much information at that exact moment, right? So with that, you know, just because you know where all your followers are doesn't mean you know until you focus in on one. You don't necessarily know exactly what every single one's doing at that exact moment, right? You just have to, it's that general sense until you really zoom in. So with that being said, there is really no limit to how much a god can take on, but the limits start to happen in their abilities. First off, their ability to contain the magic, right? If they're just kind of like leveling up, right? You only have so many levels before it becomes detrimental to you.
Yeah.
Same thing happens with gods. If you take on too big of a god and you can't handle it, like, that mantle will tear you to shreds, and go find a host that can handle it. And bring your mantle along with it.
I was about to say, because then there's 2 vacancies.
Because that's happened. Gods have taken out one another, tried to absorb the power, and all of that power went to even a better god because they couldn't handle it. And so then it got delegated again. But yeah, when it comes down to that, if you can handle the power and you can handle the responsibility, there's nothing stopping. But the responsibility is what catches most people. If you can, most gods, when they do the challenges, can handle the power. It's the responsibility that they need to handle. Because now they have every lesser god below them, like that below the god that they just consumed, is now under their command.
Yeah.
So it's the entire sphere, everything below them. And that means every decision is now under there. But they can't just say, well, I'm the god of war and I took over, you know, let's say like the god of oceans. So now I'm just going to suddenly make everybody a warfaring, seafaring, you know, like war race.
Yeah.
That's going to imbalance things. You can't take your ideology of one of your spheres and imbue it onto the
Like,
others.
enforce it onto, yeah.
Like, some do in very sly ways. And if you're a good god, you can very easily intertwine them. But you have to do it.
But just all
subtly.
of a sudden telling all of your paladins, hey, you water paladins are gonna start promoting war and stuff.
Exactly.
They're gonna be like,
you have to.
The fuck?
Yeah, but you can take you can do that. You can take over an opposing, you know, faction and get them to do things that are within their power or within their mindset, but still for your deeds, and just slowly bring them into your fold, right? So that's like the ideology is there a limit? Up to Zenith.
Sure.
Like, if you could eventually take on Zenith, you could become him. But that's the idea that no, there really is no way to say you can't take on more. It's just, if you do, can you handle it?
Yeah. It'd be very interesting if there was some lesser god that started just eating all these other gods. Like, I've seen those like video games, those like stupid video game ads that just have like that one thing just absorbing the other ones, and like until it gets bigger and bigger.
That's basically what you do when you first ascend up until you become a lesser god. That's basically what you do, is you just find your power until you want to become a greater god, like an actual god of something. That's basically how you do it, is you can just keep on absorbing, but eventually you gain enough power to where the only step up is to take a mantle, like to take a responsibility. But it can be done. It's just, again, every time you take that on, it is a diplomacy. So you take on all these people. If lesser gods below you don't like you, they can rebel. They can go seek the assistance of other gods. They can push you out. Like, just because you're their boss doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's more of your boss due to the fact that you can just like punish them. but it's still spheres of influence. You still have a responsibility, and if they don't like your responsibility, they can go to someone else and go, hey, he's fucking up the order of things, and other gods don't like that shit. So if I as a lesser god can go to this other god over here and say, hey, my boss is stepping on your toes, like stepping into your territory hardcore, I don't want to do this, don't make me do, I don't want to go to war with you. This god will come over and just bitch slap and be like, what the fuck you doing in my area? And again, gods keep each other on
I kind of look at it like the mafia or some shit. Like they if you just go and whack the head of some other mobdom, like, are all their people gonna all of a sudden just like do what you say?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like yes, they might, because they're afraid of you and you do have an army and stuff, but also they might be like, kind of fuck you.
Yeah.
So I could totally see that. Okay.
So there's a lot going on, and that's why I like saying, like, to people, it's like, you can not only can you become a god in High Point, but you can keep going. Like the game doesn't stop. It just gets
way crazier,
more and less interesting and for different reasons.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's enough. That's all the questions from chat. So let's see where we at. There we are. All right.
Who eats the gods?
Who
God
eats
eater.
the gods?
All right, I'm gonna go refill my water. I will be right back.
Would you mind doing mine as well, and then we'll get into this history. All right. So I am really excited about this topic today, everyone. As you can already see, I mean, spawned a whole hour of conversation just talking about our ideology of enchanting. So let's find out. As soon as Kage gets back, we will find out exactly what D&D says about enchanting. What did they define enchanting as? Because that's what I want to know from the perspective of 1st edition all the way to 5th edition. What do we have? We have how many pages do we have today? I don't. What's my page count? Where should I get a page count? No, what page? 12 pages. We have 12 pages today, chat. This might be one of them, but we will try to not drag it out too long. As soon as Kage gets back. But yeah, we're gonna go over everything. We're gonna go over, the history of it, the mechanics, the lore, the limitations, what was able to be created, risks and rewards, limitations, like how much you can actually put into it. And we'll have some examples from each edition of what was able to be created. So yeah, this is gonna be this one. Waiting for that water. Good questions though, Cart. Thank you so much for joining today. Those were some excellent questions. Nice way to get the brain flowing and get everything started so we can kind of get into the mood. What do you mean by his rendering? I don't actually know much about Matt Mercer's realm. Like, I really don't know much about Critical Role or anything behind it.
Most of their stuff is actually based on actual 5th edition lore. Like, he's got some of his own like NPCs and stuff, but a lot of it is in like Phandalin, Neverwinter.
Okay.
Like, exists in a lot of the places that exist in kind of like as far as I know, like, I know he's got a lot of his own like storylines and stuff like that. Like, he's got the one anime now for his
the Vox Machina.
The Vox Machina.
I just saw a TikTok. I don't know how old it was, but I guess they went for like a Kickstarter for Vox Machina.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know when this happened.
This was probably a while ago. This is before the anime came out. This is probably to get it going.
Yeah, so I guess when they first did it, their goal was 750,000. And by the time it was done, the pledge was 11 point something million. And I just the clip I watched was just their reaction when they first went live after that, and it was just them just literally no words, just stumbling over themselves. Because I mean, how do you respond to that?
That's like so wild.
Like,
man.
it's one thing
so
to ask
wild.
for like 100 and get 1,000, but like ask for nearly 1 million and get more than 10 times that because of just how dedicated people are. Like, that was cool. It was cool to see that, because it's like, I know that they're already pretty popular, but there's a difference when you see these things, right? You see like Roll20, you see them on YouTube, you think that they're like really popular because they like go to the shows and all of that. But you see something like that. For them to do what they wanted to do, to go to that next step, you saw how much money they needed.
Yeah.
But how much money people were willing to put behind them says so much more about, like, you know, these people aren't rich, but they're good at what they do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
'Cause I've seen some really famous people be able to pull off some Kickstarters. I've seen some really good, very popular streamers pull off some really good Kickstarters. But I mean, that's absolutely like mind-blowing. Like,
Yeah.
how much they were just like, we not only want this, we want this for as long as you can produce it. Here's you wanted how much for the next 10 years? Here's the next 50. Like,
yeah. That's wild. That's
absolutely
so wild.
like amazing. So yeah, good for them. Absolutely phenomenal for them. I mean, they, you know, there are sometimes I see, again, we've talked about this, I see some streamers and I'm like, I don't know how you got all of those views and I don't know if it's worth it, but there are some people out there where it's like, hey, you grind for 10 years and you deserve having something.
Right.
I've tried, honestly, I'm not a huge fan of watching people play D&D. I'm not into it. Like, that's honestly, to be completely honest, we've said it multiple times, that's one of the primary reasons why we have yet to actually game on here. That's one of the primary reasons why we don't, why we do this, why we talk about D&D, why we get people comfortable about thinking about D&D, but why we don't play is I have a hard time watching people play, and so I have a high standard of what I would want to produce
for people to actually watch. I get that.
And I also I'm just not into it. Like, I'm just not interested in doing that because I don't collect the lore and the story like that. Like, I do it because it's my world, and everything that I do and you do, we work together. But when I listen to other people, maybe it's just the ADHD, but I just can't keep up. When there's too many pauses, when there's too many out of game conversations, when there's too many rolls and math and book check, like when there's just too much that's just not the story like an audiobook, I honestly will just eventually get lost, right? And after so many, you know, gaming sessions, I kind of in general lose I mean, I've tried to do like podcasts, but
I do get that. I'll say, because I watched I think all of season 2 of Critical Role, right? And I like went back and like watched all the episodes because I had started late. They were already like midway through that. Now, there are elements of it that I 100% agree are it's hard to get through some of the aspects of just like watching people like slog through the thing, and I'm like, it's not like you're watching a movie. You're not like constantly getting plot.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You're actually watching them.
You're watching the things happen, and and so like there are elements of it. Like, I will say, I get a lot on my TikTok feed. There's this one group. I really wish I remembered their names because they're freaking hilarious. But they play this like kind of a silly version of D&D, but oh my god, like they have these like crazy wild animations. But a lot of the stuff that happens is like, it's about the story, it's about what's happening, but it's these jokes that they make about the scenarios that they get in. And so like there's elements of like just people being real in these situations that I appreciate and that I'm willing to like watch it for. But again, a lot of the times it's lightweight. Even something like you and I were talking about, like, is on in the background, and it's something that you just kind of listen to like while stuff is happening. But like when a scene comes, I can stop it, I can rewind it, and I can go like pay attention to what's happening or whatever the case may be. But you know, I mean, to be honest, I'm rewatching the Fate series that we talked about, but I'm recognizing, because I have other anime that I watch every once in a while, but there are some anime that do the same thing to you, where you're sitting there, you get the flashbacks, you get all of this other stuff that's happening instead of just watching the thing happen.
And if it's not properly building the story, if it's just giving you the info but it's not developing it,
yes,
I totally get that.
So like it's all over the place, and maybe that's why I'm slightly desensitized to it, but it's kind of wild.
Subway Surfer you need in the corner. Jesus,
wild, absolutely wild.
No, I honestly, I don't even watch those. Like, I'm just, when I scroll, the two things I'll immediately scroll past, if there's an unrelated video playing with whatever's playing, or if there's somebody just if there's just a floating head just sitting there just listening to another video.
Oh, I hate
instant.
those. I'm sorry.
I give you about 3
Will
seconds.
They just shake their head the whole time or like wag their finger.
If you don't start talking, or if there's 2 different videos playing them out, I immediately I'm like, no, I do not give any credit to those.
That's hilarious.
No, like don't make money off of someone else's like,
Stuff. Yeah.
Nah, I'm good. I can't do it.
Oh, so wild.
All right, well, let's get into this. Okay, so let's find out what D&D has to say about enchanting.
All right.
Starting all the way back at first edition, let's talk about enchanting in lore and in spell school. So in first edition, we've talked about this a lot. We've talked about so many different history ofs, but with first edition, obviously a lot wasn't codified. So much left to basically DM discretion. It was really just bare bones. So kind of like that magic, we had a lot to play with, right? We had very little to actually know about. We had a lot to kind of understand. But magic in first edition was categorized by distinct schools, with enchantment/charm being recognized as a school of actual magic. With that, the enchantment charm school included spells that would influence the mind and will. These things included like charm person, sleep, and suggestion. So this is like what I talked about. This is not the style of enchantment that I like. I do not like it being under this mindset, which is again, I would have preferred this being under psychic magic. You know what I mean? We had psionics, but like just psychic magic, right? The idea that like I get enchantment, in being enchanting, like something's enchanting, but and like that's kind of like, oh, you're a charmer.
Yeah,
like,
more socially than anything else.
And why we went there, but I still don't like it not because I prefer it as part of what we were talking about before about the magic creation and the magic item creation, just because I don't like that word for the concept of a type of magic. It just doesn't sound right. It just what kind of magic are you at? I'm an enchanter. Like, so you just make people smile. You're just really charming. You have a lot of charisma.
Right.
Like I don't think about an enchanter as like a school of magic. It's something that someone can learn how to do, like to enchant something. But like the idea that your entire study is enchanting, but it's like, but where do you get the magic to put into it? Yeah. Like you learn how to put magic into something, but and again, maybe this is just my mentality of it, but yeah, the idea of like an enchanter as an entire class kind of fails the mentality, especially if they're going to get things like illusion and mental powers, because I feel like again that has a better category.
Interesting. I'm seeing spells on the enchantment spell list like Bane, Bless, Animal Friendship, Animal Messenger, Calm Emotions.
Right. So all mental stuff, right? Like all things
Command,
you could do on like a psychic level.
Yeah. Dominate. Yeah, it's so wild. For all enemies abound. All of that has to do with messing with people's minds.
Yeah, but they call it enchantment instead. So yeah, so that's where I'm just like, I wish that we had a better school for this. Okay. So in terms of item creation, that went back in first edition, the process was very vague and mostly just dependent on the DM. Like it was kind of just suggested that you could create items, and that's about all we got.
Wild.
There wasn't really any fully officially developed enchantment of items. So most of the time, magical items were often referred to as relics. Half the time, ancient civilized, divine blessings. Kind of like what we talked about, like how we define like, artifacts versus legendary.
Yeah.
Kind of most of the time in first edition, most anything that was magic wasn't like people were producing those common, right? Those were things that were found in ruins and stuff like that. You found an ancient. That's why those were so powerful in the early editions. Because coming across a +2 shield was like, there's only one of these in existence, and I had to find it. Like, this was never going to be found if I wasn't here, kind of thing. Which I do like. I kind of miss the idea that like magic was a little bit more scarce. Not like all magic, but I do kind of miss the idea that
I do feel like
there was more struggle to it.
In that era, because it was so new, the world was smaller, or at the very least, it felt smaller. Like, I don't think they were anywhere near spelljammers or anything like that. And when that was the idea,
it was like you lived in a city, and then again, there's a ruin outside of a city that was too dangerous for people to go to because monsters.
Sure.
But inside of there was, the battlefield of an ancient army, and it had magical weapons. Like, yeah, I totally get the lore was easier to do, and nowadays people expect that to be a one shot. They expect like, well, we're gonna do that in the afternoon, and then what? What are we gonna do after we do all of the ruins? Like, like most people don't have that mindset of how games used to be played and how much it was actually like a process. So yeah, very interesting that they had that they even had the idea of being able to create them. But again, most of the time it was just rare that you would even find them. the idea of creating them just was kind of a much later game concept. How to enchant, again, no codified rules for this one, so it was all on the DM. There were certain spells. There was a spell called Enchant an Item, which allowed the magic user to prepare an item for a permanent enchantment. And then there was a permanency spell that did allow it to carry a permanent effect, but it did carry a risk of potentially draining your life force, but that was kind of it. Kind of all we had was this kind of duo concept of just the ability to put something in it and then make it available. And the limits of this, again, all up to the DM. There were no limits in place. It was kind of complex because you had vague rituals, like you had the enchant item ritual, and then the entire process was really just left for the DM. That's all the books had, was they have to know this spell to be so they have to be a certain level. They have to know this spell, and then they can enchant an item. And if they also happen to have this spell, they can make it permanent. There you go. That was all we got. So not great, but definitely a seed that I like. I love the concept, right? I love how this is where we started. There was no guarantee to success. There were no like crafting feats, so a lot of it was just either role player dice rolls. It was kind of just, again, whatever system that table was doing. It usually was very expensive. Usually required the most rarest of ingredients: dragon's blood, celestial beans, wings of an angel. And could even take weeks to months to years to be allowed to be crafted. So it could honestly just be one of those things where they locked it to where you had this idea at level 3 and you won't get it till level 18 kind of thing. Wild. Permanency was the highest risk, though. Permanency came with a chance that I think it started out as a 5 or 10% chance in first edition, where it would actually drain your constitution permanently. So the idea that every time you did this, you could just lose life and lose your abilities. And that was a big deal in the early set. I know that's a big point of debate on whether or not this should be brought back. I don't mind that the older editions had things like stat and level loss.
Sure.
I know that a lot of people are really against the concept of level drain, but I think that comes from a 5th edition mindset of everyone should be at the same level. Whereas back then, everybody was just what you were. So level drain, I know, is not everyone's favorite concept, but I like it.
In those times, I do feel like it was easier for you to be valuable within a range.
Yes.
And I don't think that's necessarily the case in 5th edition. Like,
you're valuable once you've hit the benchmark.
Yeah, like there are certain elements or certain things that, like, you can do, but like if you're not at a certain level with the other people at the table, like,
you're limited.
It's going to be hard. Like, you're not going to feel like you're being helpful. Like, if you can only cast 3rd level spells and everybody else can cast 6th level spells, like, it's hard. So that's all it is.
One of the big limitations, though, one of the things that they did give us is that pretty much these spells were capped at a minimum of 10th level. And again, 1st edition, 10th level was a very high level, right? Like in 1st edition, 10th was actually considered high level. So being able to be, having to reach 10th level before you can even attempt to create these also meant that, again, this was made very limited. Limits, again, most magical items were relics, so finding something that you could even consider doing this on was also kind of a challenge.
Because not necessarily everything could handle that.
Yep. There was no really easy way to identify, because the spells like identify were vague and had limited information. So again, another roadblock that a lot of DMs would use on whether or not an item was already magical, if it could handle more magic. Like, there was just complexities that, again, were just made to basically make this a viable option, but not, or a doable option, but not one that's gonna it's gonna be a one-time this game. Like, it's gonna be a one-time per campaign you're gonna do it. And the process. So the process in 1st edition was complicated, as at least compared to some of the other ones. At least, again, because it was vague. So complicated was probably just more or less trying to be a good storyteller. But you needed to be a high level, so minimum 10th level, before you can even get the spells. You needed to be able to get the enchant an item spell. So to find it, to learn it, you needed to do all these things. Remember, you had to learn spells back in the day. You had to actually roll for that. So that was also all of these roadblocks that you could hit before you even did it. And the enchant item spell would just prepare it. The process was lengthy, usually taking the most rarest of items in a very long time. The intense ritual, the actual ritual of doing it, could last several days, depending on what you were trying to do. So all of these things would stack into whether or not you could even fit it into your campaign.
Right.
Then you had to have all the additional spells that you were going to do to actually imbue it. So for instance, they had a couple of examples where, like, if you wanted a ring of fire resistance, you had to have spells related to fire resistance or elemental protections. So there was no specific spell, but you had to have a kin spell that you DM would say, yes, that will give it the correct ability. Obviously the expensive materials. And then of course, if you wanted to be permanent, you needed an additional spell of permanency, which could make you lose constitution permanently. So that was also another big issue. And then of course, everything was always at DM approval. So don't have a dick DM.
Yeah.
Like, sucks if you have a dick DM.
That's fair.
Failure rules were, again, primarily the loss of constitution. However, a lot of the times it was gamed where the item could come out damaged, not work correctly, not work at all. It could become cursed.
Interesting. Oh, I like some of these ideas. I like a lot of these ideas.
Could be as small as just the materials are wasted, or it could blow up and cause you damage. So there's a wide range of things that could happen if you failed. Obviously, the time frame was just dependent upon how elaborate you were trying to do it. There was no limit on how many you could do, but obviously the limits were basically how many spells you'd probably be able to have and know.
Sure.
So it was probably just limited on the abilities that you had. And another couple examples. So like a flaming frost and shock greatsword. So all elemental enchantments, right? So let's say you wanted a greatsword that does flaming frost and shock damage.
Okay.
Not only would you need the enchant item and the permanency spell, and a flame spell, and a frost spell, and a shock spell. So that's 5 spells you need to be able to know and memorize. Right? So your character has to be of a high enough level to have 5 spells that it can cast. And do it all correctly, and have the ability to do this over the course of days, and potentially lose permanency, because remember, you have to cast permanency for every single one. So technically, you need to enchant, then you need to have a flaming spell permanency, shock spell permanency, frost spell permanency. So technically, and then you need so technically you need 7 spells.
Oh, crazy.
Just to get this item. And it would take, technically on like first edition terms, to do all of that for the research, the materials, and to get the ritual right, it would take about 10 years.
10 years?
10 years in game for your character to. So if you have that plan to do all of it, to learn, because again, the idea of the process of it's not just like you go read a book and you're like, I know how to do this ritual, right? So it would literally, like, that's how ridiculous the idea of enchanting items was in first edition. Like, you weren't going to get godlike weapons. You could get a +1 dagger if you were lucky. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, that's just the limitations of the vagueness and how it used to get balanced out, right? That's how we basically used to balance out.
Okay.
So moving on to second edition gets a little bit better. Again, my favorite is a mix of second and third, and we'll get into that once we've gone over.
Interesting. Okay.
So with second edition, we did get an expansion of the enchantment school. So the enchantment charm school actually became a little bit more defined. It was encompassing mind affecting and influence-based magic, kind of like before, but got a few more spells under its belt. This is like domination, mass charm, other spells that got added as well with second edition.
Okay.
So all of this kind of came under the same idea, but enchanting items became a little bit more codified. So the Dungeon Master Guide gave us a little bit more options for this and a little bit more of an actual process. So they would cost more and be a little bit more difficult, but it was much more tangible. No more 10 years to get crazy items. You would need still a wizard or priest of a sufficient level. So you still needed one of the casters. You still needed the enchantment item to properly prep it. You needed the application of relevant spells. So once again, you needed spells that would make sense for what you're trying to do.
Right.
Rare materials, rituals, and weeks, sometimes months, but they got rid of the concept of years for that effort. So again, that effort isn't the ritual itself, it's the progress of getting everything. And a lot of DMs by second edition were doing things like, it'll take you 3 weeks to get this item, but we're talking about your travel time, do this dungeon, kill the creature, get the item, go back to town.
Right.
So 3 encounters and your 2 months is over kind of concept, right?
Right.
So that's how a lot of people would play it. So the time frames got a lot easier to deal with. It was more about get the items you need, learn the things you needed to learn, and good DMs would just add that as part of the campaign. Go to this library and you'll learn, right? But getting to the library, it wasn't like you had to spend weeks there, but getting to the library was a whole process.
Okay, fair enough.
And you still needed permanency to finalize the enchantment, because again, everything else would just fade away over time or after usage. And then of course we got a couple extra actual in-lore enchanters or powerful wizards that were very well known for creating a lot of the legendary enchanted items. So they expanded the lore and the concept and gave us more examples of who and what was created.
I like that.
The limits of enchanting were still primarily focused on the DM, but of course, due to spell memorization limits, it still was also kind of stopped there. But the DM could also impose limits depending upon how creative players were. I know I've seen players to where while doing this, they would max out how many spells they could memorize, but then they would be able to utilize magical items that could cast the spells for them.
Yeah.
So I could say memorize, so be able to, do the enchant and permanency, but maybe that gives me only 3 spells to imbue it with. But what if I replace those 3 spells with permanency, and then I have a couple different wands of different spells that I can cast,
right,
and get that magic in there, and then just burn all of my permanencies, right? So there was ways that you could abuse it depending on if your DM was allowing you to be creative. The strict level and spell prerequisites. So of course you needed to be a high level. This was still typically around level 10 or higher. And you still needed the the 2 spells on the front and end. But again, permanency was for every spell you wanted to make permanent. So you had to have that ready constantly. Obviously, we still had no fixed price. So a lot of the costly ingredients were probably, especially for second edition, more adventure based or just set for very rare price points. And the process could fail. In second edition, they actually added a whole concept of being interrupted. So not just that your roll could fail, but at this point, the entire effort, time, gold, and resources could be wasted if you were actually interrupted, similar to losing concentration. So if this actual ritual was supposed to take you a certain amount of hours or even a day or 2, if you're, say, in a situation where you have to do it and you roll for an encounter and an encounter comes in and busts down the lab that you're working in, you could actually lose it all. So that's situational, wild. Very situational, but it was in there. So permanency still did drain your constitution. So it was really just basically one of those things you had to make sure that you could either get your constitution back or make sure this item was worth it.
So it drained your constitution every time, like regardless,
you
had a
chance. You had a 5% chance of losing constitution.
Okay.
And then cursed items still remain prevalent, so you had to experiment with caution. You could create a cursed item unintentionally.
Now, is that like, because to me, and you and I have talked about the idea of cursed items, like the curse really has to come from somewhere.
Not
or
necessarily,
something.
Because the curse can just be a defect. Like again, it's just you're trying to imbue it with magic, and the curse could end up causing it to backfire. So it's a ring of fireball, but it always casts on the caster. It's technically a cursed ring. It's just a fucked up ring, right? Or it could be.
So, but you also said, I'm pretty sure that like a curse has to be something that the wearer doesn't want to take off, right? Usually,
that's when I hear cursed weapons, that's where my mind always goes.
Right.
I go to those things where it typically will want you to go for it, or it will want you to keep it, or it will be impossible to take off. That's typically what I think of. But a cursed item can also just be one that doesn't work as intended.
Okay.
Like by loose definition, the item, the ring that Dovd carries is technically a cursed item because it technically does not work as intended.
Well,
it's a very loose term.
Sure. But I would say,
but in this term, that's what we mean
wasn't
by
it experimental?
Yes, and that's the same thing, right? That's why I'm like, in terms of, in second edition, cursing was the concept of you're dealing with magic that you don't understand and know how to control.
Sure.
So the powers that be, essentially, this is kind of your punishment for fucking up. Like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to come intentionally from something, but the idea was that the magic fucked up and now the ring has a bad aspect to it. But again, you know, I mean, you could even make it something funny. It could be a cursed ring where it turns you invisible, but also blinds you.
Wild.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, you could just be that, you could just, you know, do something that dumb, right? So again, so curses were there. They were basically just encouraging the risk factor. They wanted people to do it, but kind of like the deck of many things, they wanted you to sweat it.
Okay.
Is it worth it, right? Is it really worth it? And of course, it was always time consuming, up to months, kind of got rid of the concept of years. But while still being heavily DM controlled, we did have a much finer list of what we had to do. You had to have the sufficient level. You had to have the enchant item to open it up. You needed to have this necessary skills. So again, if you wanted something like a cloak of invisibility, you would need to have an invisibility spell or something akin to an illusionary spell of invisibility to imbue it into the coat, and then your DM would work out the specifics. Obviously, still things very rare. So like a wand of fireballs might require phoenix feathers or an elemental fire essence. So it's
interesting.
So it could be not just, you know, the fireball spell, but you need to tell the item, this is how the spell works, and then here's the item you're going to pull magic from.
Oh, maybe it's like you can't avoid having the material components, because a lot of times you can avoid having material components if you have like a focus or something like that.
Yep.
But maybe this like requires it because you're
and
taking...
the permanent, yeah, and then the permanent spell is there to kind of keep the magic alive for it to pull from.
Right.
So again, I do like that where again, they're thinking about it. They're really making it tied to the item that you want to make. The permanency spell obviously was really important, but that's where you would drain your constitution. You had to do that for every spell you wanted to make permanent. So every extra effect would be a permanency spell. And then failure could ruin the item or ruin your day. The item could shatter and become useless. You could lose all of your progress. But you can get an unintended, again, they call it an unintended cursed effect. So not quite a cursed item, as in one that may have been created for that purpose, but a cursed effect as in an unintended effect. Right?
Okay.
You know, like, how about this? You try to make a ring of invisibility and you have a very low level invisibility spell. So the DM rules, okay, this ring will allow you to be invisible to one person, because we actually know that's a psionic.
Sure.
Being able to just be invisible to one person. But let's say you fuck up your rolls and it gets cursed. So it still works, as far as you know, it works. Be like, hey man, am I invisible? Yeah, I am. But then I look back at you and so are you.
Oh, you can't see them either.
So maybe the idea is that when you wear the ring, you can choose someone to become invisible to, but they become invisible to you. You just, so everyone else can see them and everyone else can see you, but you can't see each other.
That's so wild.
So that could be a curse. That's what I would call a curse in this context.
Right.
Because it's a fuck up that's unintended, and that's a perfect curse, right? That's that perfect, because I also think of, in this context, curse just means like the equal and opposite, right? It's I want to be invisible, but if I can only have one person be invisible, but they also become invisible, is that really helping this? It's helpful, but it's not as helpful as I would want it to be.
I mean, depending on what you're doing, like, you might be able to get away with it, but like,
a clever player could.
Yes.
But in average, the idea would be, if I'm going to sneak up on a guard, but then he becomes invisible, he doesn't know he's invisible because he's not invisible to himself. No one else sees he's invisible, so no one's going to mention it. But if I wanted to sneak up on him and then he starts moving, I can't see him. So, you know, that's what I would say in that particular case. But that's kind of like the fun that I remember having, is playing around with what spell should you put in and in what order. Because I love the idea that the order also matters.
Sure.
So depending on, like, imagine the idea, I think one of the example that I was given when I was first like learning how to experiment with this is like the idea of the order of operations being, if you put a frost spell in front of a fire spell, right, to get an effect out of a wand, that would cause steam. You can get maybe a steam effect where it's hot steam coming out.
Interesting.
Whereas if you put the fire spell first and then you put the frost spell, maybe you get smoke.
Okay.
Because it's like the fire coming out and then being doused.
Okay.
So
yeah.
The idea was churning in my head back when I was doing this, because my DM was very much like that. So it was like, if I wanted to make a sword that does two things, but what order I put them in would matter. So I had to think about this, go, okay, well, what's triggering? How is it triggering? What do I want it to do? Because kind of like wish spells, my DM wouldn't fuck with it to make it not good, But he
Yeah.
would be thinking like, if you put that spell with this spell, the magic would work this way. Whereas if you put them this way, the magic works that way.
Yeah.
And so that's what I like playing around with. That idea of like, if someone's like, hey, I want to create a wand that does something, but I want to create, like you were talking about before, like a mage that could like blend elementals, right? Like
Yes.
elemental magics. So imagine you do that with this, where you're like, well, what happens if I put fire and water or fire and ice together? So when this talks about experimentation, that was what it was. Put fire first, permanency, then water first, permanency, or second permanency, then close it, then cast the spell and see what happens.
Yeah.
But then you'd have to go back and see what happens the other way and see which one is better, and then decide, is it worth burning a constitution point just to do that?
Yeah.
But that's, to me, so much more fun.
See, I would give chops to the person who discovers how to just move them around after you've already cast them in there. Like, imagine that would be I cast this the wrong way. Let me just reorder it and see.
I would totally be, if you were like a sorcerer or a wizard trying to do this, and you had like an equally high-powered artificer with you, I would be totally okay letting an artificer go, like to the point to where they could rearrange it for you.
That would be so
to
wild.
an extent, maybe.
Sure.
But I would absolutely be totally fine with artificers learning how to like do arrangements. Because again, that would solve the concept. That would solve the one risk problem of having to burn a constitution, or potentially learn a constitution every time you made an item. That would be the way.
I mean, you would need it for new items, but to like, you wouldn't have to keep
you could tinker. You could truly tinker. I like that idea. I would totally let a duo do that.
That would be kind of sick.
Maybe I should make a famous duo in my realm that does that.
That would be cool.
But yeah, so I like playing around with the concept of the order of operations, because I think that can also make much more unique items. Instead of just saying, I want it to do X, Y, Z, like, imagine being able to do one where it's like, hey, a fire and water spell will create the steam, but let's say you want frozen ice. You actually want your blade to like have flames of ice. So it's like, I would have to go about thinking like, okay, well, let's have your character research it, and then we'll workshop what are the spells you'll need to do that, and how would it work? Like, what is it? What's the effect, right? It's not just like cold fire. Why not just have it, shed just frost?
Sure.
Just constantly an aura of frost. Why do you need it to be flames, right? Because to me, if you just want it to like look like flames, like we could just say it has an aura of frost that, flicks off. But the flames to me have a property.
Yeah.
So I would choose the difference between like, if it just emanates, like maybe it can like, you can like, maybe it like has snow that falls off. So if you swing it around, you make snow on the ground. And after a while, like you can make like a slippery spot. But let's say if you really wanted the flames, what I would say is if it's flames can catch. Meaning that if you hit somebody, maybe they
can
could
spread
catch
like flames
on frost. But
then catch on cold.
But then I would swap
like
it, because normally flame catches like fabrics. Well, fabrics normally keep you warm against the cold. But you know what really sucks in the cold? So imagine having a frost flame sword that has a chance that whenever you hit other metal, it can ignite the metal in frost flame. And then that metal would be difficult to hold for that person, because they would take cold damage from holding it.
What if it was their armor?
And then if it's their armor, it basically works as heat metal, but it's freezing them. Like, these are the things so when someone wants to create something, I'm all about
wild.
it. But
it
comes down to like, what is the idea? What do you want it to do? Because when you say frost flame, flame has a property. You just want it to do cold damage. So I'm thinking, what does flame do? It catches shit on fire. But fire wants burnable stuff. What does cold want? Cold wants, like, it will just zap anything. So it makes perfect sense that you could slap a shield and it would ignite the shield, but not their clothes.
Yeah.
And I think that would just be a cool alternative to a fire sword, right?
I do like that.
Oh man, that would be. And again, because frost wouldn't light organic matter on fire. You wouldn't light a forest on fire with
cold.
But imagine being able to light a futuristic city or like a modern city, like you ignite it and it just starts having this like cold fire to everything freezes over. Every building just gets covered in frost as it like goes over. So if you let the entire city burn, when it's done, there's like 2 feet of snow on the ground, like everything frosted so much, it's just literally like whited over. And every building is just like 30 degrees colder inside.
That would be
Doors
wild.
can't be open. They're like frozen shut. Like, this would be such a different, devastating like
concept.
Oh my gosh. I like this.
I like that a lot.
Cold burning
like
a city would be such an interesting idea.
I need to create this weapon now.
Oh, okay. So with that, let's see. So, and again, there was no limit to how many spells you could have. Basically, how how many you were able to store is how many you could do.
Sure.
Most DMs did cap it at 2 or 3, which was what I mostly found. Most were like, that's it.
Right.
I just like the idea of if you can figure out a way to min-max it, and because again, I don't mind min-maxing if the rules are like, okay, so I don't like min-maxing in the sense that when it's almost basically like in 5th edition when it's basically handed to you to min-max and it takes away from the creation.
Sure.
I like complex rules because I don't mind when you min-max complex rules like this, like with this, right? Being able to have this spell, know how to have all the permanencies ready and have all of the effects you want. If you went out of your way to collect magical items that could hold permanency for you, and then you went out and memorized all the spells that you want, and you did and worked with me and worked on how the spells were going to work, and you knew how this was going to happen, and you worked on it in game, I'm going to let you min-max it. I'm going to let you make all those rolls. If you're willing to take the risks and you did the work, I'm always going to allow it. I'm not going to be mad about it. What I don't want is someone just being like, can I just have it? Like, this is just the thing I want, right? And then once you get it, I'm not going to be mad that you have it. Like, that's the idea, is like, as long as you earn it. I just don't like min-maxing when it's like a given.
Yeah.
I like the idea that if you went out of your way to earn it, right? If you want to be a badass like character, that's cool. But earn it in game. Don't just earn it on paper, right? Don't just give yourself the right feats to look like a badass. Actually, like, earn that moniker in game, right? Go out and do badass shit.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I feel that.
But yeah, so most people, so still a lot of the issue though was the constitution drain, and just the high level and the high risk. That's really where most people had the issue.
Okay.
But this is one of the ones that I like the most. Now, 3rd edition did some great things. One aspect I'm not hugely a fan of, but for the most part, blend this with 2nd edition, and you have what I think is a beautiful way to do enchanting.
Okay.
So with 3rd edition, they redefined the spell schools, defining the enchantment as a distinct school specializing in mind, influencing, and compulsion magic. So now the enchantment / charm got dropped. Now it's just the enchantment school.
Okay.
School was divided into 2 sub schools though, and this is where we get charm back. So you had the overarching school of enchantment with sub schools of charm and compulsion. So charm had charm person, suggestion. Compulsion had things like dominate person, or gaze.
Okay. Yeah.
So magic and creation though finally became a core rule. So now 3rd edition finally brought it into the core mechanics of actually how to create things. This is where they divert a little bit though. So what they did was, by creating a core, they codified it with very clear rules. The one I don't like though is feats were introduced to allow systematic enchantment. So this is where I'm not a big fan.
Systematic enchantment.
You took feats in order to decide how and what you can enchant. So you would have the feat called craft wondrous item, or have a feat craft magic armor or arms and armor, forge ring,
Interesting.
Scribe scroll, brew potion, craft staff, craft rod. So these were feats you had to take. So if you took craft or forge ring, you could enchant. You can make magic rings. That's it. That's all you could do. You can make magic rings.
Interesting.
If you said I wanted to take craft magic arms and armor, you can make magic weapons and armor. That's it. I understand to an extent about this. What I don't like is saying that somehow the type of item it is, regardless of its make, just the shape of it matters. You know,
yeah.
I could have a dagger, you could have a ring, both made out of the same metal, but somehow you can imbue yours with the same spell I can imbue mine with, but we can't imbue each other's because somehow I only know how to do it to daggers and swords and bows and arrows and your armor and my armor and their armor and chainmail and plate mail, but I can't do it on that ring. I can do chainmail. I can do a bunch of rings. You put all those rings on my shirt, I could totally enchant it. You take one of the rings off, no idea. No idea.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? It's not a vibe. I get why they were trying to do it, because then they were trying to make it more accessible and everybody can kind of like a specialty.
Yeah.
Just not the way I would prefer it. My preferred approach that I've played with, and I still kind of have it as more of a when you want to do really advanced enchanting in high point. But my approach is, instead of forcing it to be this, what I just like to do is give bonuses to and allow higher level enchanting to those who have taken a proficiency in a similar field. So if you're a wizard and you can enchant something in high point, you can enchant a sword. Ripping open something's magical pouch, basically, and shoving things in it is nothing different from a piece of armor to a sword to a ring, right? Reaching in and adjusting magic is all the same. However, let's say you've taken blacksmithing. You fundamentally know how to make a sword. You fundamentally understand what goes into that process, the heating, the changing of the metal, the stretching it out, the sharpening. You understand layers, you understand folding, almost to the point to where you could say you understand it on a molecular level.
Sure.
I would let that wizard who took blacksmithing have bonuses to enchanting weapons and armor if they made that stuff.
Okay.
And I would give them the ability to do more. So if you were a regular wizard and you wanted to enchant a sword, but this wizard over here learned blacksmithing, they would just be able to do more. They would just have more options because they fundamentally know the weapon better. But let's say you took leatherworking. You can imbue clothes better than anybody.
Sure. Okay.
That's the way I would like to do it. And that's the way that High Point does it. It's not a requirement. You can imbue and enchant anything you want. But if you really want to push your limits, you have to know the item, right? You have to know it in and out. And my thing is the feat saying what you can enchant just doesn't feel right. I don't like that aspect. I like the idea that you can get bonuses by understanding it more, but not needing to only be able to imbue that.
Okay.
But outside of that, I like everything else they did. I get that. They did it a little bit better otherwise. So the process of enchanting an item basically said that you had to select the appropriate feat. So being able to, enchant the item itself. You had to meet the minimum caster level and spell prerequisites. They did expand golden XP, so they had better charts for what you wanted to do.
Okay.
And what you were actually doing. And then you had to do a couple of performance of crafting checks. And then now basically anybody that was proficient in magic could do it. So I like the somewhat simplified version. I like the idea, again, the inspiration of being able to do more with understanding what you were doing.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really still like from second edition is the enchant and permanency aspect. I really do feel like for me, that still needs to be a core bread and butter. The idea that of how to reach in, give magic away, and then seal it off permanently, like in a system. I feel like that is something that deserves to be its own mechanism.
So I get that. My thought process immediately goes like, what if this is, who knows, what length of time this particular process takes, but I kind of imagine almost like having to make concentration checks or something, but instead of casting the open spell and then being done with that spell, the open and close, or the permanency spell,
should be one spell.
It's one spell, and you just
that's how I look at it, because it's a ritual. Technically it's a ritual, so I get that.
Yes.
I always look at it as, and that's why I don't necessarily because I also don't necessarily like the full-on idea that second edition has it these are just spells you have to memorize. I kind of don't mind the ritual. You can cast for free, as long as it's a ritual. So technically you can cast it for free, so you don't have to memorize that one. I don't even mind it if it were a feat in and of itself, being able to enchant, because in later editions it is easier to just say, hey, I'm going, because you don't get feats very often now. So I'd be okay.
It depends on who you are. I mean, fighters get them all the time.
Yeah, but I don't mind a spellcaster being able to burn one of their ASIs to get a feat that says they can enchant an item now. Get rid of all of these. You can enchant a ring versus a scroll versus a potion. Just say you can enchant. Just say I take the enchant feat and then continue with the rest of this. Just make sure it's the right item, the right amount of money, and the right spells. I'm okay with that. I kind of just miss the idea that the opening of the item and sealing in the magic, I feel like that is in and of itself
it should be a part of
whether that is 2 spells, 1 spell, a ritual, or a feat. I don't care. I just really like the idea that is something you have to know differently than everything else. I don't think that should be innate to magic. It's kind of like what we talk about, why is it that every single time someone learns that they have innate magic, they all go to the same conclusion? You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense that every person to ever come across magic always learns these 3 spells. Think about the list of cantrips. It's like you're telling me that every single time in all of the history of all of D&D, the moment magic manifests, it only manifests in one of these 5 ways. It's just, it's weird. Unless you put it in the lore that there's like, you know, a god of magic who dictates that when you first get magic, this is what you can play with. It's gotta be one of these. But you know what I'm saying? Like for me, it's a little bit more weird to limit it. So I don't mind a feat. I don't mind a spell. For me, I don't really treat it as a spell. I treat it more like a ritual. You go learn how to enchant. And once you, basically it's a proficiency. It's a non-weapon proficiency to be able to do the enchanting. And that's how I treat it. It's once you know how to do that, you know how to do the ritual. Everything else still falls in place. You have to know the spells. You have to have a way to get spells in there. You have to wait to wait.
Is permanency is its own spell? Is its own separate aspect of?
So yes, but I don't like treating permanency like a spell, like a memorized spell. I kind of think of permanency as part of the ritual. You can choose to do it or not as part of the entire ritual, but doing it comes at the cost. You're essentially giving up part of your magical essence to feed
So you still like spend a spell slot on it or spend a memorization?
No, not for purpose. It's part of the ritual. It's just it's kind of like,
what's the cost?
It's the potential for losing constitution.
Gotcha.
Because the way I look at it as
every time you run permanency?
Every single time. So if you imbue it with 5 spells and you want each one of those to be permanent, that's 5 chances to lose.
D100, but it's 5%.
Yes, but see, I don't mind that though. Or D20 and just don't crit.
Yeah.
But I prefer percentiles. But my biggest thing with that is like I prefer it that way because I don't mind people trying to push it, right? But I also have more rolls. It's not just the Constitution roll. Every spell has a chance to fail. Permanency has a chance to fail.
Yeah, but not all the spells failing are going to lose you Constitution.
No. But
just
they could do other
is
things.
Yeah.
But yeah. So the risks are different at every stage, right? The more you do, the more risk there is, right? Every spell, every permanency, they all have different risks, but it all leads to something. So if you push your luck, like again, if you find a way to put 10 spells into a weapon, that's fine. That's 10 chances for you losing Constitution, and that's 10 chances for fucks ups. 10 chances the item's gonna die and blow up on you. 10 chances that's gonna become cursed. Like it's not like 10% chance for each one of these. It's 10 chances every single time. Every time you roll, it could get cursed, blow up, just become inert,
right,
or lose you a piece of Constitution. If you want to roll all of that, let's have fucking fun. Because honestly, if you roll and you get through all of that, congratulations, you deserve the item. But that's because and the reason why I say that is because that's my choice as a DM. If I've put all of these roadblocks, I don't understand DMs who put roadblocks and then are mad when people succeed. Then they weren't proper roadblocks. That was you just being a dick. My thing is if your
roadblock needs to not mean you can't do this. It needs to mean actually get over this hurdle, and then you earned it.
Exactly. And so for me, I'm very particular that if I've put in roadblocks, if it seems very difficult, if it seems hard, there's a reason. But if you're able to overcome it, I'm not going to get mad that you overcame it. That's the whole point. I decided what those roadblocks were, and I decided that was my risk level. And if you passed it, oh well. If I don't like it, guess what? Then I need to reassess my risk level. But I can't take it out on the person who passed my test and then change it later. You know what I mean? Like, I don't buy that. So yeah, my biggest thing about this is I just don't like the idea that there is a feat per type of imbuement.
Yeah.
Just not a big fan of that part. And I'm not a big fan that they took away the whole ritual aspect.
Fair. Okay. Outside
of that, I like how they expanded it. I like that they gave it more stuff. And then they codified it more. I'm glad that it's an actual core rule. I just think this is it's too simple and it kind of takes away the spirit of it.
Sure.
It just kind of makes it feel like it's great if someone's like, nope, I want a fire ring for this character, so I'm just going to take that feat real quick so I can make a fire ring.
Right.
It doesn't really feel like it's going to be part of the character, right?
Yeah.
In 3rd edition, they made it more of a mix of alchemy, arcane ritual, and divine blessing. So it was kind of this amalgamation of what was created.
Like all of those at the same time? Or like those are the 3 different ways you can do it?
It was, basically the idea of creating items, because you had like brew potion as one of the feats. And like create staff or rod. So those were a little bit more on the clerical side. So it was dependent upon the item that you were creating and the situation. these were the mix of things that would go into it. It could be all alchemy based, it could be a pure ritual, it could be divine blessing, it could be a mixture of. But these were just kind of what they were talking about, how the lore explained why people were able to do this now.
Right.
These were the reasons why people learned alchemy, they learned rituals, they got divine blessings. All of these things led to people being able to have access suddenly to create these items. And then, of course, there was other things like artificers when they got introduced. And then we got magical crafting and enchantment was expanded when they got introduced because they had more of a tangible aspect for magic as well. The limitations. So XP cost. Enchanting magical items did require the character to spend XP equal to 1/25th of the item's market value. So for every 100 GP the item was, they had to spend 25 XP to give it up. I love this. On top of the permanency aspect of losing constitution, I think this was one of the best add-ons to the enchanting concept, because this to me is like, this is the representation of what you're giving it in order to like basically let it feed. Because I've told you in High Point, XP is valuable. XP is like almost like magic, right?
So, okay, can you store the XP in the weapon? Like, so my thought process is this, like, it'll suck because you can't just like hang on to XP.
Correct.
So you have to like do something with it. So can I like pour it in early before I have all the rest of the stuff to enchant it? And like, because you
in High Point, no. So you can pour XP into something that's already magical, and that can help it, but you can't make something magical.
So then you just have to hope you have XP at the time in order to give it, or drain your current level,
or drain your potential.
That's aggressive.
And again, back then you could have level drain, so you could drain your levels for this item. But imagine someone who's level 20 burning, like imagine someone who's level 20 who say has like a mob farm in their dungeon, right? Like you're level 20, you own a dungeon, right? You basically have a dungeon that has like a mob farm in it. Imagine wanting to create something, you're level 20, you burn your XP down to level 17 to create the item, and then you go into your mob farm with your new item and go back to level 20 in a couple hours. Like, think about that. Like, technically by the rules of D&D, there's nothing stopping you from literally dropping 3 levels, but then going somewhere with the item you just created and just getting your XP back in a matter of like if you think too hard about D&D rules, like applied to like if people in game actually understood them.
Yeah. That was so it was a Brennan Lee Mulligan quote. It was like,
oh, the magic school one.
Yeah.
Every like, magic school would just be like, day 1, let's go burn some kobolds.
Hit the books. What are you talking about? That's not going to help you get good. You need to go out there and kill some things.
I know, and that's the idea, right? Is when you only do combat XP, it doesn't make any sense to do anything else but just beat up everybody, right?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So I do like I have a modified version of this. Obviously, you can use XP, but it's not required during the enchanting process, right? The idea is that you do put part of yourself in, which is why you still do the constitution loss, because it's more of like why the wizard, right, is based off constitution and a fatigue base, right? You're using essence that's eventually draining you. So, but I do love this concept, and I have the modified version where XP can be used to help things that are already magical and sentient. But otherwise they aren't required to be used to make it sentient or to make it powerful.
Right.
Because again, XP doesn't equate to magic. Like XP isn't magic. So it's not like putting XP into the weapon is giving it magic, but once something is magical, XP can then be converted.
Fair enough.
Gold cost was also shifted. So crafting an item costs half the market in gold value. So 1/25th its market value in XP, 1/2 its value in gold.
Okay.
Its market value. So whatever you're creating, find the market value. Feats required. You only had to have the specific feat for the type of item you were creating. You had your spell level requirements. Most of them are some items did require a level of 10 or higher, depending on what you were trying to do. There was a whole like chart on different types of items.
This is third still?
Yeah, we're still 3 and 3.5. And then the time investment was 1 day per 1,000 GP of the item's price. So if it's a $10,000 item, it's gonna take 10 days.
Okay.
So I love this
Interesting.
codification. This is very loose to what I have in terms of like when I think of how long things are going to take. That's kind of loosely what I think of in terms of like it's usually about the price, and the severity will depend upon how many days. Sometimes I go based on the price of the value of the item, depending on what they're trying to do to it. If they're just trying to get it to like a +1 or +2. Other times I go for like spell level, depending on what they're trying to put into it.
Okay.
So it just I like to be kind of just more in the moment and dynamic with it, but I love that they codified this a little bit easier to just like, here's exactly what you need. Don't let
Right.
DM doesn't have to decide anymore. Here's what you need.
Okay.
Limitations. So mundane crafting time was long, so a character crafting a +1 longsword needed a full week of work.
So is that? Oh, this is. Because like I'm trying to think about that compared to the value one that you just talked about. How?
Okay, so how much is a +1 longsword? Well, I guess it would be 3rd edition, right? So, but depending upon how much a
How much a
+1
3rd edition
longsword
longsword was.
is. So let me see if I can actually quickly pull that up. Let's see. So maybe I have my math wrong. Maybe I got the wrong. Here we go. Magic items. Sword. Here we go. That's not. Where are my magical items?
Where are my magical items at?
A long ass list, but I'm not seeing. So the mundane items, but where? +1. Really? You just have regular magic items on the body. These are shields and armor. That's actually
Okay.
quite a bit. So armor type. Okay, wait. So, add to enchantment bonus on table armor and shields to determine total market price. So a regular. Oh wait, no, armor and shield. Gotcha. So that's that price. What about weapon table? Prices for 50. Oh, I see what they're trying to say. Gotcha. Add enchantment bonus on table weapons. Here we go. Okay, finally found it. This is a really crazy one. Okay, so
I love it.
Standard. What were we talking about? A standard longsword.
Okay.
315 gold.
315 gold.
However, you basically add a standard in 3.5. There was a standard price for a plus value.
Oh,
So for
okay.
a +1, it was a add-on. So your base price plus 2,000.
Okay.
So a +1 longsword was 2,315. So based on this, technically a +1 longsword you could say it should have taken 2 weeks because it's technically 2,000 GP.
Okay.
But it's 1 day per 1,000 GP of the item's base
That's
price.
1 day.
So or 2. Yeah. So it would have been.
It'd be 2 days, not 2 weeks.
So yeah, it would have been 2 days, not a week.
So, but the other one, was that a different edition that was saying it would take a week?
I may have missed a couple of things on the ritual itself. May have taken time. So create magic item took 1 day for 1,000 GP items. Base price. But what did I miss? I think I missed a part where there's added time for the ritual itself. So there's a base time for the ritual plus I think the time for that.
Okay.
I think I missed something there. So that would make sense if it was like 5 days or like two, there's got to be more math that I'm missing from my research, because it looks like either that was taken out of a reference that I found and so their math was wrong.
Okay.
Or I'm missing a piece of that math.
Okay.
Where
Fair
it was
enough.
like a base time plus a day per 1,000 GP. Like
Right.
And the 1,000 GP, I don't know. I'm probably missing something in all of my research. Sometimes that happens.
Fair enough.
So yeah,
no, that's no worries.
Let's just cut out the 1 day per 1,000 GP. But yeah, it would basically take quite a while.
Okay.
How that may have been 100 GP. Well, no, because that would take ages. You know what? Forget about it.
We'll find it.
And again, the flaws or cursed item was always dependent upon the DM. 3.5, from what I could tell, leaned less away or leaned more away from curses. So it was still there, still suggested, but it wasn't as heavily like if they fuck up curses.
Right.
Players could not craft artifacts though. Legendary items and artifacts had no craft ruling. They were meant to be discovered. So you can only craft up to very rare.
So if they don't have, then they must not have been created.
Well, they were, but the idea is when you think of a legendary or artifact, they're just old. Like what we've talked about before.
Sure.
This is kind of where I get my concept. So the idea in 3.5 was just you can't create an item and call it legendary or artifact because those have to be discovered.
So does that mean that already created items have the ability to evolve over time?
Yeah, I would say that that's the idea. Is it's either an evolution or it's just that these are ancient old magic that doesn't exist anymore, kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, this was just basically saying that legendary and artifact were reserved for the old created items, and items you create are basically just very rare.
Got you.
And that kind of goes in mind with what I used to, how I kind of like the hierarchy. I think of those things as like when it's legendary, it had to have been involved with a story. People have to know what it did. Artifact just means that it has to basically be of an unknown or ancient origin, right? Like I like to think of it that way, so that's probably where I got it from is 3.5.
Fair enough.
And then magic creation process now was formalized. So you must take the crafting feat depending upon what you wanted to make. You had to have an item of a high enough quality. Usually DM specified or based off of the value of it. You needed to know all the necessary skills. So for instance, and they had a lot more codification here. So for instance, one of the examples, if you wanted a ring of protection +2, you needed to have the shield of faith spell. That would give you the +2 to your ring.
That's what interesting.
So that's the kind of stuff that they started to codify, is really nailing down, like, because I think Shield of Faith gives you a +2 to your AC.
Yes.
So that's where the idea is. They started to literally like codify, look at what it does and put it best to what it actually gives you. Gold cost was the 125th and half the market price. 125th of XP and half the market price. A number of days equal to a GP value. Yeah, there must be a base value that I missed there. I want to see if I can the website I was looking at. I want to see where I got that 1,000 from, and see if did I just quote somebody by accident or. Gotcha. I see. I mistake. Okay, so I was mistaken in what was going on in the conversation that I was trying to get some of these examples from. The 1 week for the +1 longsword is if you were creating it from scratch. That includes the time to craft the longsword.
Oh, forging the sword itself.
The enchantment of a sword already made would have only taken 2 days.
Got it.
I was looking at it from the point of view of most of the time you actually built it from scratch, because finding an item of good enough value was the difficult part. It was easier to get all of the materials
and build it
and
yourself.
make it yourself.
Interesting.
So a +1 longsword from scratch takes a week.
Got you.
But it only takes 2 days to enchant.
Got you.
Okay. I knew something was wrong with my math, or not wrong with my math, but I knew I was missing something about those two things. Yeah, no. So I just didn't have the detail that it's the magic requires 1 day per 1,000 GP, but a longsword takes about, give or take, 5 days to craft.
Right.
So 5 days to forge it, Tuesdays to imbue it. There you have your 1 week for a longsword.
Got it.
Okay, now I feel better, because I hate that. I hate feeling like I've didn't do my research properly. But yeah, so crafting can take several days for the item itself if you're crafting it, plus the several days per 1,000 GP, 1 day per 1,000 GP. And then of course you need the spellcraft check might be required. If it was particularly powerful, you might need to do a spell check, kind of like a spell fail, making sure that everything's right and that you did it correctly. And then of course this item could be sold or used. So unlike earlier editions, 3rd edition was very in favor of trade with these items. So before it was kind of the idea of the DM would be very pressed to have anyone buy it. And usually it's just because nobody wants to buy something that they can't use. Like, you don't run into other adventuring parties. What do they need a +1 shield for? Right. Yeah. But in 3rd, they were like, no, you should be able to make money off of this. Like, you earned it. Do it. And I like that. I'm 100% behind that. I'm big on, if you create it, you can do whatever you want with it. So that's also something that I take into 2nd edition.
Very nice.
And the maximum amount. So magic items could have multiple enchantments, but each added enchantment doubled the cost of the next one. So that's how they held back their over.
Oh, okay.
So once you put 1 enchantment in, the next enchantment's going to cost double what it would have. The next enchantment's going to cost double what it would have. So it's not constantly doubling. It's not double, then double, then double. It's just the next one will be doubled. So if the first one cost you 500, the next one will cost 500, the next one costs 1,000. Yeah. If the one after that costs 500, it's 1,000. The next one after that costs 1,000, it's a 2,000. Gotcha, it's whatever it was that's base value for it. It's going to be double. And that, what I'm assuming, is the double in XP cost, because XP of the for the magical, and the cost of time and everything. I'm assuming that it just means everything. Right. On. So if it would take you normally 2 days to enchant that, now it's going to take you 4 for the second one.
Interesting.
Because everything doubles. I look at that meaning the entirety of the cost doubles. So if you want 10 enchantments, you may be sitting there for a fucking month trying to stay alive and having a fucking wizard sit there and be like, I cast hydrate on him. You know, legit though, that is actually a really unfortunately missed spell. Like, you have Goodberry, you have the things that allow you to feel sated or be sated for a time, but there isn't anything like a hydrate cantrip.
Interesting.
Where you could like legit just be like, boom, you're hydrated for the next 10 minutes. Like, you don't need water. Like, you're basically hydrated for the next 10 minutes. You know, you're basically full. Like basically kind of have Goodberry, but as a cantrip, where you could just be like, you know, like you're good. You know, a small cantrip where like temporarily, like imagine a cantrip where you could like make a 10 by 10 enclosed space air conditioned. So essentially a tent. You could put up a tent and then just be like, drop it by 10 degrees. Okay, now we're in the desert, but now we're in basically a tent where you walk in.
Interesting.
And you could be in shorts. Like, why aren't there like small... Again, this is kind of like prestidigitation, but more on an environmental level. But like, these are some cool ideas for spells where it's like, why can't I just hydrate a single target?
Interesting.
A very small level spell, right?
Yeah.
Hydrate a single target, bait a single target, you know, of food. This is good for clerics. And I do like the idea of being able to do like a 10 by 10 enclosed area. You can change the temperature by like 10 degrees.
That would be very convenient. Like, even Because like you remember what's the spell? Liam's tiny hut.
Yeah.
I'm curious if that actually protects you from the elements, or if it's cold outside, it's still freaking cold
I think it
inside of
does.
his hut.
I think the hut actually does, but
Okay.
a spell like that would still be nice, right? It's kind of like that cross between like as long as you have an enclosed space, you can basically just again as long as you have a tent, you can just be like we're good.
Yeah. That would be nice. That would
Make
be
a
very
beekeeper
nice.
suit and then just be like, it's cold in here. It's sealed. It's an enclosed space.
That's funny.
So yeah, so the next one, so the cost of the next one would double, and then weapons and armor could hold multiple effects, but required defeat investment to increase crafting costs. Okay, so just again making sure that it has to be very expensive for you to be able to do it. So, oh, excuse me, no, the pricing is additive. So the first item goes in at cost. The second item goes in at double cost. The third item goes in at triple cost.
Triple.
So it's multiplicative.
Triple the base?
Yeah, triple of its base, right?
Okay.
So it's multiplicative of the number of ones you've done.
Gotcha.
So 4 is 4 times. The fifth one's 5 times its base.
So your first one is a 1 times counter, then a 2 times counter.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's how they're stepping it down. So it's not just how many you can do, but it's how many you can afford. You couldn't stack enchantments by meeting all the conditions, so you have to have the efficient level, all the prerequisites, paying the extra XP and gold. Basically, you can do it. There's no limitations. You just had to figure out how. Practical limitations included things of like crafting an item with multiple effects became just exponentially more expensive. There were no hard limits, but the time frame, the weeks and months it could end up taking, the fact that you know your character might not be able to like be awake that long. Like there were practical limitations that you could easily apply and say you're not just going to off screen, you know, 6
all this
months
stuff.
of straight enchanting. You know, the unreasonable costs for adding too many, adding 2 or more of the same type of spell DMs could fuck with. So if you had 2 flame spells but they don't actually do anything extra, because you're basically just
like Burning Hands and a Scorching Ray.
Yeah, and then just find out that it maybe does like an extra D4 of damage, but it doesn't like truly do anything additive.
Yeah.
So again, just different ways that you could help like, you know, balance out these creations. So yeah, so if you wanted something like a flaming sword, right? A +1 flaming sword would normally cost you 2,000. If you wanted to make it into a +1 flaming sword with frost, it would be 6,000. Or it would add another 6,000. So it would be a total of 8,000 to create a +1 flaming frost sword. That's just the gold cost to just make that.
Holy.
You can make a +2 armor with fortification. So the +2 armor would cost you 4,000, but fortification would cost you 16, getting you to a total of
16.
And remember, these are also created from the ground up kind of concept.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these could go quite a bit. Like
It
get
can
expensive.
get hefty.
All right, I'm gonna go use the restroom real quick, and then we will get to 4th and 5th edition. I
Okay.
don't think we have anybody. I think we lost him.
No?
No, people still here. I'll be right back. Entertain whoever's still here. Shout out, chat. Still here.
Yes. Give me a sweet shout out. Shout, let it all out. These are the things I can do without. Come on. Anyways. I'm definitely liking this foundation we're laying for like what you can do throughout enchanting, and like it gives me so many cool ideas for the possibilities of what can and can't be accomplished. Like I earlier we were talking about being able to enchant something and then have like an artificer like shift with it. Like these types of things just give so much inspiration, I feel, for what can be done. And again,
What's the point of that?
and it's kind of interesting because those are the types of things for me that give inspiration to like actually go down certain roads and to actually investigate certain pieces that you can actually do with. So I really am behind this collaboration of like doing all the things, you know, like we were talking about earlier, the artificer and the wizard, and just that kind of stuff. It really tickles the mind to go places it's never gone before. So I'm here for that.
And that's what I like doing. Is I like people who come up with ideas that challenge the way it is.
The status quo.
Yeah. All right, so 4th edition. Let's move on. Wait, Lepa, it's so nice to see you. Hope you're having a great morning.
Good
All right.
morning.
So the enchantment school was removed altogether in 4th edition. Just get it out of there.
What?
Yeah, so the
Wild.
enchantment school. We're just gonna start off strong. You know how 4th edition likes to do it. Just fucking kicks down the door.
We love
4th edition restructured the spell schools, removing enchantment as a standalone school. However, the effect of enchantment magic still existed. It was just basically disseminated under the other types of schools. So all the spells were just kind of pushed elsewhere.
How do they go about explain like something like gaze? Like, what is that like?
I mean, do you think I cared that? I mean, I didn't do that much digging. Okay, I didn't do that much digging for
That's
4th.
fair enough. That's fair.
Just saying, they already ruined it. So
You're already killing stuff and stabbing things.
But yeah, enchantment magic still existed. It was just different classes and power sources ended up getting it.
Sure.
So they did introduce an enchant magic item ritual, which allowed a player character to create or enhance magical gear. So there was still a general enhancement or enchantment. The process required the character to have the ritual caster feat. So this was kind of a new thing, kind of like what I was talking about before, just having a generalized feat that can do it. This one though, ritual caster, is completely different. It's a different type of magic casting, but has nothing to do with enchanting. It's just ritual caster was kind of their base. I would have preferred a feat that's specific to enchanting,
Right.
not just the ritual caster can do it, right? It's a little bit too easy for anybody to do.
Sure.
But whatever. They needed the correct ritual and materials, and they needed gold time to complete it. So very streamlined, very straightforward.
Okay.
The XP cost was removed, so basically it was just more dependent upon the material and the gold cost. And most of the enchantments basically were predefined rather than customized. So it came down to, here's a list of what you can do.
Yeah, that's very on brand for 4th edition.
So to answer your question, I did find that compulsion and charm effects were now controlled more by class powers, which made abilities affecting only combat or skill challenges. So it was, it really wasn't like magic anymore. So the limiting effects of the enchantment now, so there's no XP cost, but it was expensive, so the prices went up on everything. It just basically, you needed to have crap tons of gold and raw materials, very rare materials to boot. Ritual caster feat required, and you had to also know the enchant magic item ritual. So you had to be a ritual caster feat, and you had to know a certain spell in order, or a certain ritual in order to do it. So you needed both of those prerequisites. And rituals had level limits. You could only enchant items up to your level. If you wanted to create a higher level magic item, you needed a higher level enchanter, and it could take hours or days depending on the time. So they kind of still, they're lowering the time commitment in game, but they're increasing the costs. Magic items did become more common because of this, just simply because it was a little bit more accessible. But obviously it was limited to levels. So obviously you had to be a higher level to earn higher level items.
Sure.
You couldn't craft artifacts or legendary items. Those are still not craftable. And gold was your biggest limitation. Pretty much getting gold in 4th edition wasn't the easiest.
Okay.
The process in creating magical items, getting the ritual caster feat, the enchant magic item ritual was performed. The predefined ritual replaced all previous methods. So it was basically just know the ritual and it's done. Kind of what we were talking about before.
Yeah.
It's all in one package of opening the item, closing the item.
Just neat and tidy. Yeah.
You had to have all the gold required. You had to be a high enough level. And that was it. You just did it. No other extras. You just could do rituals, know the ritual, and have enough money. That was it. So a lot of the predefined, like I said before, a lot of them were predefined effects. There were no stacking. So you just you choose an effect, and that's what you got. There, you couldn't stack and you couldn't customize. Fourth edition basically said you get a list.
This is what you get.
Only one. Yep, and one enchantment slot per item, except for artifacts. Artifacts could come with multiples, but you can't craft artifacts, so there's your player limitation. And of course, some very rare weapons had what they would call level scaling enchantments, which would unlock multiple powers over time. So that's kind of where you got like the idea that you could have like artifacts would get more powerful.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a comprehensive list, but a lot of the pre-made magic was just things like, plus values, basic damage, like elemental damages,
right?
Things of that sort. Very straightforward, nothing super special. Just what you would expect from something that was modeled after a video game. You know what I mean? Just very straightforward, +1, +2, poison damage, fire damage.
Okay.
Nothing, nothing great.
Interesting.
And very limited, just kind of very limited, like 4th edition, streamlined and limited.
Streamlined and limited.
But moving on to 5th edition. So the 5th edition everyone knows and loves, right? All right. Well, Enchantment, the School of Enchantment came back. Of course,
okay.
We got the Enchantment School. The Enchantment returned as a distinct school of magic, though less emphasized than in the previous editions. The key spells included Charm Person, Suggestion, Dominate Person, and Modify Memory, all things that should belong in psionics and psychic magic. The school remains focused on manipulating emotions and mind. Again, I just don't like enchantment being that name.
Yeah.
Magic item creation in 5th edition has been vastly limited as well. It is far more limited than in 3rd edition, and barely even exist in even comparison to 4th edition.
Interesting.
Enchantment items require a recipe or formula, which is a DM dependent idea. So suggested that you have to have some sort of schematic, a blueprint, in-game reason that you can create it or know how. Rare components, usually tied to the item's power. So what you want it to be able to do, there's usually going to be a rare component, kind of what we said, like fire with a phoenix feather, something like that.
Yeah.
Gold and downtime, obviously, to craft the item and get all the materials. And in some cases, you need a powerful arcane or divine force to infuse it. And then only artificers have the specialized magic item creation features. So basically, you had to find someone else who could do it with you. You have to find someone else who can do it with you if you aren't an artificer.
So articulate that again. What does that mean? Only artificers have what?
So they have the special. So only artificers that were introduced in Eberron have specialized magic item creation features built in. So basically, kind of like their infused magic and all of that, like they have those.
Right.
So essentially, in some cases, depending on how powerful the item is that you want, 5e says go find someone to help you build.
But is that the stuff that they're talking about is tied to the artificer? As in, if the artificer infuses other items, that one, your oldest one, could eventually go away.
Well, I know that that's just a thing that artificers have. They were just saying that artificers are the only ones in 5e that have built-in item creation mechanics, like features that class gets. Everybody else, in some cases, if it's not mundane enough, your DM would basically be encouraged to have you go find someone who can help you.
Right.
It's just another limitation that the DM has choice of. It's not all of them. It's just in some cases, if you're making a powerful enough item, the DMs are encouraged to not just let the character create it. So it's like saying, hey, go find the most powerful druid, or go find, the leader of this, not just the church, but like of a temple, right?
Yeah.
Like basically they have to go one step above what they can do. So it's like, if you want to play, do like a +1 dagger, that's one thing. But if you want to do a +5 dagger that steals their soul on a crit, you might need to go talk to the god of death.
Yeah.
And maybe he can do something for you, right? That's how I read that. As you can do what you want, but if you're pushing the limits, you got to get the okay from someone who can actually do it.
Gotcha.
I think the note here was just pointing out that artificers are the only ones that by default were able to create magical items like this, which I do like. I do like that they at least baked it into somewhere, because I do like artificers. I think artificers are, unfortunately, they came in so late in D&D. I feel like they're kind of a really missed opportunity for a long time.
To be honest, they're the only class that did not get updated with 2024.
Interesting.
Because they're not in the group books that those other ones got introduced in. They're the only ones from a different one. forget which book it was.
Oh, Hoylepa's first subclass is done. We are
Really?
excited.
Are we going to get a submission soon?
I hope you are willing to submit that, Hoylepa. Let us know if you are going to submit that. We would be very excited to.
Very excited.
First subclass. Ooh. Curious what it is. What type of subclass? I'm gonna guess for Hoylepa. I'm gonna say first guess is gonna be rogue. Second guess is gonna be druid. I don't know why. Rogue or druid are my guesses for what. For
I was gonna say bard, but I could also say druid.
oh, bard is a good answer.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Hoylepa, what is it? We're dying to know.
But Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, by the way, is the book that Artificers came out in, and all the other classes came out in the PHP. So
Gotcha. Oh, wizard subclass. Both
wizard,
wrong.
wild, very.
Nice.
Both
I'm
very
excited. All right. So yeah. So anyway, back to 5th edition. But yeah. So artificers were the only ones. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how artificers will be in 24. Enchanting. Let's see. Oh. So yeah, so 5th edition, the idea of like ancient items, artifacts, things like that still being very rare. And even PC created items are still more rare than that. So the idea that you're still more likely to run into an ancient powerful weapon than you are to build one. 5th edition still leans into that mentality of you might as well just go adventure for it. Don't bother with this. Most magic items are, especially in like the 5th edition core concept, most magic items are things of like lost civilizations, ancient wizards, divine intervention, rather than just people just going about their day, just being like, I need a magic fork. I need a magic cup. I need a magic shield. Like, so I think that's the main idea. 6,000 total. How did you do? Oh yeah, because each stream, I keep forgetting that. I'm like, did you just drop 6,000? Like, no, you just a cumulative. I wish you would tell me how much you dropped right now versus the accumulative, because
it's always going to be the max. It's always going to be the max.
I just wish though, because it messes with my head that way. I just see that. There we go. Hoylepa coming in with another 2,000. Already at 11,000 from.
I'm always number one. Wild, so wild.
Always. But yeah, so they're trying to keep it in the mindset that it's easier to find than it is to build. The limitations. So no general crafting rules are in the actual core rulebook. Magic item crafting rules were left mostly to DM discretions. Xanther's Guide did have some introduction to crafting systems, but mostly required finding formulas and special materials, more like blueprint finding than actual and the materials, rather than like true discovery and creation.
Okay.
Obviously, always rare materials. So this one was like trying to force them out. Get a certain type of dragon scales if you want dragon armor, kind of thing. You have to really push yourself to go earn it. Gold and time, of course. Uncommon items took weeks. Legendary items took years to craft. So I totally understand that.
Well, I mean, at least it's possible, but dang, years, man. Yeah. Now, is this like years of like nonstop continuous work, or is this like you're working on it?
I think the idea is between the price, the material components, and the effort and the learning. Like, you want to create a sword, but you have to now learn how to make a sword, so blacksmithing. Get all the materials, go learn how to smith those materials, fuck up probably a couple times, go get more materials, learn how to craft those materials properly, then learn how to make like.
Is that only on your first go around?
No, I think the idea is like, if you want something, the idea is like, it's the idea behind a legendary item taking 10 years is you don't just say, I want a +5 sword made of mithril. You have to go out and individually figure out what each of those things mean. How do you make a sword? How do you make a +1 sword? How do you make a sword out of mithril? How do you make a +1 sword out of mithril? Then how do you make a +2 sword? Like, that's how I imagine what they're trying to get across, is that it's not just, I want to make an item, let me go to the local shop and buy all the items, or I have all of the money, so I just get it. It's the idea that how would your character actually go about that? You have this idea, how do you go about it? Because no one does it for you, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to go learn how to make a weapon out of a brand new metal, where do you go get the metal? How do you refine it to work it? How do you work it? Once you work it, can it take magic? Like, that's why I believe it takes 10 years. It's not like you saying, I want to make this item, and then you sit down and 10 years later you have it. It's more of a, there's just so much you have to figure out that in game your character.
See, that just makes me feel like it should take less time if I try and repeat the process the next time, because then the majority of that stuff will have already been done.
I totally agree. The idea would be that the time frames would be cut down drastically because you know where to go get the materials.
Yeah.
You know how to forge the materials. Now, is it going to be just, can you just bang them out left and right? No, but it's not going to take you 10 years. The 10 years,
Right.
like you said, would be the first one, the learning process. And then after that, it's the actual process of just doing it over and over, right? I mean, again, basically, if you think about it, that's exactly like being a blacksmith. It's going to take you 10 years to be able to make, like, it might only take you 2 years to make a battle-worthy sword, right? Like, you may only take 2 years to truly be able to say, I can craft a sword that'll go into battle. But guarantee it's probably going to take 10 years for you to be able to make 100 identical swords.
Sure.
In 4 months.
Sure.
And it's probably going to take another 20 years to do 1,000 swords in that time frame, right?
Sure.
That's what I look at like this, right? Is a blacksmith takes years to be able to not just learn how to craft something, but to make it usable and then to be able to reproduce it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you might take 10 years to make your first sword, but it's not going to be like, well, I'll bang out my next one in a week. You still have to learn that process of, can you now reproduce it? You now have all of the tools, but can you do it again?
Yeah.
And that's why I also believe that legendary and artifact items, this is why I like the idea that they're rare and they are one of a kind. Because it's not just the fact that the person didn't want to create a second one, but were they even able to? Was it dumb luck that they were doing this, or was it skill? Because you assume that if they made it, it's because they're skillful. But what if it was one of those things where it was on their 100th try and a bolt of fucking lightning out of nowhere happened, and that's what created this ring, and they can't reproduce that bolt of lightning, right? What if
I do kind of like that idea.
It's like, that's what I like to believe is, like you were just saying, like, it took you 10 years. It should be easy to create another one. But what if the next time you do it, you just can't get the mithril right?
Especially if it's legendary. Like,
yeah,
you know, like those are things that are not so, even if they're not one of a kind, they're not supposed to be common.
like,
right?
like just calling it legendary doesn't mean it has to have, like, it doesn't have to have won a war. But the legendary sword that was made out of mithril, a material no one could ever make a great sword out of, because they would all shatter, right?
Sure.
You could just add that little bit of lore into it. Just, even if you don't even have a mythical metal, if you want to put in a legendary weapon and why is it one of a kind, say it's just an alloy that no one's been able to make ever since. Just all you have to do is just say it's made out of something that no one can make anymore.
Yeah.
Say it's say that it's made out of a metal that no one even knows how to define. There's no metal ever found like it. Just say it was made out of a meteor. An asteroid hit the Earth or hit your planet, and a sword was made out of that. I mean, dude, imagine being able to make an entire armor, helm, gauntlets, boots, the entire armor set, a shield, and a sword. And why is there only one set of this armor? Because it was made out of a meteor. An asteroid crashed.
Yep.
They made an entire armor set. They used the entire meteor just to learn how to forge something with it. And when they were able to, all they got was one suit of armor, a sword and a shield. And they gave it to their best warrior. And that's why it's legendary. Because they literally ran out of fucking material. Like, why not? You could easily just, and then it doesn't even have to have any special properties. It doesn't have to be any more special than any other plate armor. But that armor is made out of material that will never exist again. Just something that simple could make the lore make more sense. And that's why I'm okay with, like, with this mindset that, yeah, you can make a legendary item, but it might take you 10 years. Again, it's not because it's going to take you 10 years to make a name for it. It's going to take you 10 years to figure out how to do it. And then once you do it, it's going to be the only one anyone ever knows to exist.
Yeah.
It might even be deemed impossible. You might be deemed a god among men, or you may be a legend because everyone's like, how did you do that? And you're like, it's going to go to the grave with me unless I can do it again. Right? So yeah, I absolutely love that logic behind that. All right. So artifacts were still limited. You could not create artifacts. But you could create legendary items. Oh, and a lot of the times, at least in 5th edition, I guess they have something, I forget what book this was, I found this in or found a reference to, but there is something that 5th edition likes to do that a lot of the times when you create a powerful enough item, it will come with the requirement of attunement.
Okay.
So if you do create like a legendary item or anything that the DM deems too powerful, you could say, okay, you create it, but this now requires attunement. So it limits the number that an individual can mass produce for themselves. So if you want to create, you know, a sword and a shield and a helm and a breastplate, well, do you have enough slots for that?
Yeah.
So I like the idea that 5th edition is still trying to figure out good ways. Like, I think that right there is a completely fine way to limit too much stacking.
Right.
That is a great way to use regular 5th edition mechanics to help limit a character without it feeling railroady. Because just saying, hey, it's so powerful, it requires attunement, like, that's the thing that happens. You don't have to intend that to be necessary.
Right.
Right. But that could just be a product of magic. And that right there absolutely makes it to where you can't have 50 magical items you created. You can only have 3 or 4 or 5. And that's it. Once you're maxed out, you can only create items that are better than what you have.
Yeah. I think in 5th edition, that's the only edition that actually, well, I don't actually know that, but that artificers specifically get, the higher up you get additional attunement slots.
Which makes
and, like,
perfect sense.
They get to be able to like attune to like all kinds. Now, granted, I think it caps out at like 6, where
But
most
still,
people's caps out at, that's double what anybody else
amazing.
gets.
I mean, dude, the ability for rings and it's legit.
They could probably legit get a full set of armor.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, well, I mean, you think about it, it's like breastplate, gloves, helm, feet, shield, and weapon. Yeah, you could basically get an entire suit. And then the rarity scaling in 5th edition for created items was just basically designed to help decide when these things should kick in. And of course, the level scaling on when you can make it. Like, basically, a low level character, so you're thinking anybody under level 10, it's nearly impossible to create a legendary.
Sure. Yeah.
Time, effort, skill,
gotta be.
everything. You're not going to do it, right? It's going to be too expensive. It's going to take too long. You don't have the skill sets. You don't have the knowledge. It's 5th edition's really making it to one of those, you might as well just go adventure because it's easier. Which I'm not necessarily a big fan for, because that kind of just tells them don't bother. It's like, then why have the fucking mechanic? Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't, because we've talked about, I haven't mentioned this specifically, but we've talked about different mechanics in 5th edition that they kind of feel like they're telling you it's there, kind of like how gods are. It's like, they're there,
But don't bother.
if you want, but whatever. Like, it's like, why even bother? If you're telling people not to bother, why did you? I have a problem.
Just to say that we did.
Just to say that we did. But yeah, so the process is pretty simple in 5th edition. You have to have, the caster has to find or learn a formula. Basically, they're really limiting how much the player can just decide they can do.
Okay.
Like, you can't just be like, I want to create this. Like, you have to find some sort of way in game that your character will be able to understand how to make this, right? So there's this concept of like a blueprint, right?
So does that mean if you want to create something new, like, you need to go like build a blueprint that functions?
Either that or discover a blueprint that will lead you to understanding how you can make your own.
Okay.
Like, that's how they're just trying to say, like, if you want to create something that you can't go buy or adventure for, you have to figure out how, or you can come up with the idea, but it's like you can come up with a brand new way to like, you can imagine a new way to make a cell phone.
Sure.
But until you go and find a blueprint that talks about how to make a different type of radio wave that's not a cell phone wave that works until you discover that.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I imagine these blueprints are. Is you can come up with a fantastic idea, but until you find something that says, this is how I can make it happen, that's what they're asking you for. So it's not necessarily an instruction manual. It's not like saying, I created this item, only me, I've never heard of it. Why is it on a piece of paper somewhere?
Yeah.
That's not what I imagine. I imagine it's more of, hey, I want to create a frost dagger that on a crit, freezes someone's limb. So maybe you have to go and find a formula about how to, maybe what you would do is you'd find a formula about someone was messing around with magic and how to actually affect the body like that.
Right.
Because most magic's like AoE and less direct. So, or you say, hey, there's actually a legend about someone who tried to morph stone skin with other elements. basically you could just say they try to create themselves a Human Torch and fucked up, and there's a manifest out there with a formula of how to transmute that would be a piece.
Interesting.
So maybe that's the formula that you have them go adventure for, and when they get that formula, now they can take any elemental attack,
Right.
but turn it into this effect that they said that they want. So that's how I'm interpreting what 5th edition's intended is.
Okay.
They want something specific. You as the DM come up with a storyline that makes sense for why they have to discover
Whatever it
a
is.
piece of what a greater wizard discovered first.
Okay.
And then of course you have to have the right materials, all of the unique components, a dragon heart, celestial feathers, whatever you're going to do. The time, weeks for uncommon items, years for legendary items, obviously the crap ton of gold you're going to need.
Yes.
And of course you would be better off if you had a very high caster, a divine being, or an artificer with you, because they all have aspects that would make this process a lot easier. But again, it's just all I hear from this is it's possible, but just go adventure.
Don't do it.
How about you just go buy one of our modules and we'll give you magical items in there.
Oh, wild.
Each magical item is limited to 1 enchantment, or most magical items are limited to 1 enchantment. There are a couple options. Artifacts are the only ones that are allowed to have stacked enchantments. So I guess that's kind of like the only thing there. I would even suggest that legendary
artifacts, the only ones you can't craft.
Yeah. So I don't know why. Wait, is that? Do I have that right? Yeah, artifacts. Yeah. So I just wrote that down weird, but basically, yeah, you can't craft artifacts, but artifacts are the only things that can have more than one effect. So in game, players can't craft an artifact, but if you homebrew one,
how are we defining more than one effect? Because, like, I know that there are plenty of items that exist now that basically have, like, you can spend a charge to do this, or you can spend a charge to do that.
Right. Which I would assume that those are, I don't know how they would consider those in terms of like not designated those as artifacts, but I think they're just, this is more akin to the limitations they're putting on player created ones. Even if it's not called an artifact, the idea that in terms of you can't create in-game an artifact based on the core rule books, and artifact creation is the only time you're allowed to stack them. It's a very weird thing. Like I said,
Interesting.
I wish I had more of the rule books to fully dive into it, but I can't really explain the idea of why artifacts are allowed to have more than one enchantment, but you can't create them. So what's the point of saying? Like, what's the point of having the limitation if it doesn't actually matter? Just say you can't craft artifacts, because if they're homebrewed or from the book, they just have what they have, right?
Right.
It's weird to have in your rule books, artifacts can have more, but you can't make them. Then why can they have more? Like,
yeah,
such a weird concept.
Interesting.
But there are some like rare items, like I guess like the rare items that over time would unlock multiple effects too. But again, those aren't ones that players create. Those are ones that are either already part of the game or the DM is intended to put in.
Right.
And so what it sounds like to me is that all of this is just a different way of explaining the limitations between what the DM can put into their game and what a player character is intended to be able to create. You're not intended to be able to create game-breaking godlike weapons like you used to.
Okay.
The idea, it sounds that if you're willing to put in the time and effort, you're just trying to do it to get a bump. But again, it sounds like they're putting more roadblocks in place to just say you might as well go.
Yeah,
you might as well just go find it. I guess, so I do have another note here though. I guess there are on rare occasions some magical items or at least some magical effects that somewhere, possibly in supplementals of 5th edition, have stated that they can stack. So I guess that's maybe one of the caveats is on a rare occasion, there may be a set of spells that kind of can go. Again, very hard to find a reference for that, but there was someone saying that it's pretty much not doable unless it says it, and I wasn't able to find a reference for it, but again, I don't have enough of the 5e supplement. This sounds like it's something that was in a supplemental that someone was mentioning, where it's like...
Yeah, like an additional rule that you can pull from somewhere else.
Yeah, so I don't know. Again, it's very interesting. There's not a lot of information on spellcraft or enchanting in 5th edition because they don't want it. Like, they really don't.
Fair.
And then let's see. So their idea of like the practical limitations for this is just creating items that only have like a single use effect. Again, enhancing the characters with things that they can do in game, but not really meant to be game changing or game breaking. Multiple effects were really meant to be DM controlled and rewarded. So that was more, I guess, their intent is they want the highest level stuff to be under the DM's control and have that more as rewards. But I do think crafting is in its own reward. You know what I mean? If you did all of the things. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that. I definitely wouldn't have those limitations. And then of course, you know, they just leaned into the idea of like using attunement. It's suggesting using that attunement limit to help like limit players. But there's too many limitations in this. It's like if the item's too powerful, it gets attunement. So you can only have so many. And it's super expensive. And it's gonna take a lot of time. And we really don't have a lot for it. So like, you know, we're just gonna tell you straight out it's easier to just go fight. You know what I mean? It's almost just like they're fighting you every single step of the way to just not have you bother. You know what I mean?
Just so wild to me.
But like I said, third and second are the ones where I like the most. The idea of my perspective is the idea of having a set aside piece of knowledge that you have to know in order to be able to cast or to enchant. Whether it's a ritual, a spell, a feat, I like the idea that there is something outside of everything else that you need to know, right? So it's like ritual casting wasn't enough because that was too broad. I like the idea that you also need like the enchant item.
Yeah.
So I love both of those. I love the idea of it being a whole process. I really like it being both role play as well as adventure.
Okay.
I personally do like the idea of having a separation between a standard enchantment and a permanent enchantment. Like easier to make to just throw in some magic temporarily versus again having a risk factor of making it permanent.
Okay. No, I'm here for that too.
I really love that idea, right? Like the idea that like imagine like if you could make a character that can enchant, right? And you wanted to do some low level stuff. And let's say like I mean again, this is the fun creative stuff. So let's say you didn't want to risk it all. Let's say you had a shit ton of money, but you didn't want to risk everything, but you needed to like do something crazy. What if you just had it to where you made a handful of magical items that weren't permanent, but let's say you made half a dozen to a dozen wands of fire. They all get one shot, period. They just one shot fireballs, no permanence, no nothing, right? So it could take you a while, but way cheaper. But you also had one extra thing in there. One little extra one. And it's a contingency. You had contingency spells. And they all, let's say, are on a word or on a range.
Interesting.
And then you set them up along a road. You want to talk about the best way to do an ambush? Imagine having 6 wands of fireball and just walking into somebody and being like, well, blah, blah, blah. You know, kind of like the thing in the movies where they're like, but you're alone, and all of a sudden like the sniper like lines come in. Just imagine just being like, take a look around you. With the snap of my finger or a word I say, this entire place lights up. Can you imagine? Or just being able to like take like really an cool ambush where you just they cross a line or you say a word and just everything lights up. Again, though all of that was one time. But imagine if you had the ability to enchant and you could do that. You could literally make your own things like that. One time is fine. You know, we talk about like wards. Wards are basically just low level enchantments. They're just, I call those surface level enchantments because you're warding the outside. You're not imbuing it with magic. The ward's holding the magic.
I feel like you should, well, that could get pretty crazy. I was gonna say, I feel like you should be able to just do that on like magic items you find and be able to like add something like a voice activation to it or something like that. Like imagine if you found like a wand of magic missiles, right? And you gave it that ability to be able to activate on a command word or something. I mean,
you could, you know, I like the idea of being able to like add enchantments to things like certain. I have certain limitations on what can be re-enchanted, but certain things can be re-enchanted or, you know, improved upon. Because I do like that idea of being able to usually
Right.
like change it up after the fact.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's why I like the concept of having these extra difficult, all these extra complexities, because I like the role playing. I like the
Very
idea
much so.
of having, if you really want this, I like the idea of you earning it. But once you've earned it, I love the idea of letting people just run. You know what I mean? Like, again, you want to set up an ambush? Dude, can you imagine? I would love this. This is one of the craziest ideas. I rarely ever give these type of ideas out because I don't ever want to give these ideas to my players. But we have a better platform now, so I can talk about it.
Right.
But one of my favorite ideas is, again, it could be one time or not, but imbuing a shield or your armor, and the contingency is like when you get hit, or when someone crits on you, or when you say a command word, and imagine that your shield or your armor just does like a force spell that just pushes a creature 10 feet back.
I mean, Thunderwave,
Could be Thunderwave.
like,
So
that would be wild.
right? Like, imagine if you were clever enough to do that to where you're just in battle and someone comes up and hits you, like you could just put it on the back of your shield or back of your armor. So you're in battle and if someone ever comes in and slaps you on the back, like Fusro all of them just 20 feet back with that, because you just have a contingency that if I get attacked from behind, I want to clear my back. I don't want to be surrounded. How fucking cool. And again, because like Thunderwave's a cone, it basically would clear you, right? Like, that's what like, those are the clever things I'm waiting for my players to think about is when, again, it sounds like it may not be worth it, but when you think of something, it doesn't have to be uber powerful, but it can be those situations where it makes, again, building it for your character.
Yeah.
How your character, can you imagine? Here's another one. Use the enchantment spell, right? Open it up, enchant your shield.
Okay.
With the boomerang spell or the return spell, whatever edition you're using.
Captain America shield.
You have and then you permanent that. You have a Captain America shield. Throw that bitch around, or you can do it one time though. But again, I think the thing is like you hear permanency and you're like that's a big thing, but it's like the one time is not a big deal. Like the one time can still be super worth it if you know how and when to use it, right? Like imagine this. Imagine you're a caster, like because this happens all the time. How often do you get thrown in a dungeon or thrown in jail and you're stripped of all your shit, right?
Yep.
Imagine if you're the one who you're sitting in the jail cell and be like, everybody step away. Like everybody step away from the bars. You just stand like this. You're like, I'm gonna Iron Man this. And you just like T-pose real quick and you're just like, and you say a command word and you just hear
all your gear.
like imagine being the paladin and you just say the command word and all you hear is all of the tumbling of your plate armor just bursting out of the chest down the hall, the guards not knowing what the hell. It's just like a tornado of metal and then it just comes crashing through the bars and lands on you and you're like, let's leave. Like just the stupidness of that.
That would be so wild.
But you could. I would be totally okay with shit like that, right? Like, like just the idea of being able to temporarily imbue something like that, I think is just crazy. Like I think it's crazy good and crazy fun to do, because again, when you have a DM who makes the characters react properly.
Yeah.
Like again, I don't like DMs who railroad their NPCs into like being too tough. I hate NPCs who never react to what players do.
At least not react real.
Like the NPCs are always like, I'm not impressed.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you fucking are. Shut the fuck up. Like, honestly, if my NPCs see you do something like that, where you just walk in like in peasant clothes and you're like, I am gonna kill you right now, and they're like, ha 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 ha, and you just do that, like you just do the Thor move, and they're like, what are you doing? And then they hear something coming crashing through, and then you're just there, and you're just like, oh, that would be just so fucking cool, dude. Like, and I can imagine some more crazy ones. Again, if you're not using the permanency spell, right? So you can burn some. Imagine having like low-key telekinesis. So imagine you have like a quiver on your back, but you don't carry a bow. So you just always have a quiver, but no bow.
Mm-hmm.
Until one day, like someone calls you on it, or you're at the big bad, and you're just like, you know what? I think it's time. And you whisper a word or do a gesture, and from the quiver come out those like half a dozen wands that just start floating all around you.
Oh, wild.
So you have two spells on it, right? You just basically say, I want telekinesis, which would have a concentration for 10 minutes, and you want fireball. And you just load them all up with one of each. So in one command word, you just suddenly are surrounded by
nice
wands.
little halo of
and you
wands.
could just be like, I could end you right now. Like, oh, it's so fucking good. Just the terror that you could see in the BBEG's eyes if he knows what's going on, and he's just like, do I call your bluff? And that's the beautiful part. Let's say you don't have a lot of ability, but you know they understand magic. What a bluff. What if all you could do is imbue them all with telekinesis? So you do that, you pull out like 20 wands all around you, but it's all a bluff. All they can do is float.
Yeah.
So there's no fireball.
Or give one of them fireball to fire off, just to fire off to show them.
Yes, as the warning shot. And then he's just, so you pull out one, no, oh, that's it. You pull out the one and go, boom, you kill one of his things. He's like, oh, that's cute. You toss it. And you're like, oh, that was cute. And then you do the command word and 20 of them come out.
Yep.
But so he's just,
and they're
like,
all on the tips of them will glow like the other one did, but they don't actually do anything.
God, that would be so good.
That would be sick.
That would be so good. That's what I'm talking about. These are the things that I can't wait. These are the things I look forward to, but also like I don't want to tell my players about because they are so fucking good. And some of them I have in my world. Like there are some people who do things that I think of, right? Because I like to min-max, but in this way. I guess I like to mid-max. I don't like to min-max, as in I don't like to find out the best possible way to do something, from, top down. I like to mid-max. I like to basically find out what is the best, like, middle of the road way to do something.
Almost from the inside out. Like, it was like one of the other videos you sent me recently about, people, instead of, like, trying to build the craziest combat machine, you're letting your character build itself. You know what I mean? Like, you let it guide where you go and where it takes you. And so it's like, all right, if I'm this character and I'm having these troubles and I want to go about this, like, how do I do that? How would I try and solve my problems the best way possible? And like, that's what you're maxing, is this character's ability to be this character, Right. So that's I like it.
I mean, hell, like there's okay, so here, this will be the last one I give, because this one's the OP one right here. How about, like, again, this is only old school. This doesn't help anybody in 5th edition, sorry. But an old school one, again, if you don't want to risk the permanency, this one still works because it can be redone whenever you want. Take a necklace, take a ring, take something innocuous that you just wear, right? And enchant it with counterspell, with a trigger whenever you're targeted. So you could just walk around with a fucking free counterspell on you at all times. You do that 2 or 3 times, and you could literally just be walking around and just be like, oh, rings go, oh, just take off your necklace. Like, oh, there's that counterspell. Like, you could just literally have a bunch of, I mean, you wouldn't throw them away, but you know what I mean? Like, the idea is you could literally just sit there and someone throw a spell at you and nothing happened, and you're just like, that was cute. Now, you know what happened, but they don't. As far as they're concerned, they did their spell and nothing fucking happened. You didn't have to move. No spell component, no subtle spell, no nothing. You just sat there and just let them waste a spell, and you're just like
it's lightweight. You giving you like a legendary resistance, but like,
and these are the things, again, like, this is
not just saving throw ones.
Yes, and this is what I miss about, again, this is what I miss about the old school way of playing, right? I don't, like you just said, in 5th edition, you'd be like, well, that's a legendary action. You don't have one. It's like, I don't want a legendary action. I don't want a legendary resistance. I want them to believe I have one. And to me, that can be more powerful than actually mechanically having one, right?
Yeah.
And I think that can be so much more enriching to the gameplay than just saying what you have on paper, right? Because again, there's so much of this game that is played with metagame knowledge. Everybody knows what that person can do. They know what that spell does. They know this, they know that, and they expect it to be played the way they know it to be played. But that's not always fun. Like, it's fun when you can make them think. It's fun when I mean, I love doing this stuff. When I mid-max like an NPC, I love mid-maxing it because, again, instead of making an NPC that's just obvious you can't beat, I love making ones that make you guys think. I love making ones that step into the room and you're like, I don't know if he could fuck me up in one hit or not.
Right.
And I don't know if I want to figure it out because, again, I may have them be able to do something, right, that looks and just being like, oh, I'm not going to mess with that. But again, kind of like the fireball or the floating wands trick.
Yeah.
It could just be there as a trick. It could literally just be a trick just because they want that air of
that
effect,
vibe.
right? I mean, I have plenty of NPCs who have mental disorders like anxiety and ADHD and OCD. Sure. I have ones that, in certain situations when they leave, the conference room or when everyone leaves the room, they break down and have moments, right? That you, again, as players, if you know what you're doing, if you're invisible, you can see. But like, I have players that like, they have those moments where they try to do something to like, be intimidating, not necessarily to the extent of an intimidation check. Because that's the other thing too, right? Intimidation checks are intentful, right? They're you trying to inflict fear. But if you just understand body language and you just stand a certain way, if you as the character, if you as the player come in and say, I'm going to stand there with my arms crossed, and so he says this, I just stand there and stare at him with my arms crossed. If you keep doing that, I'm going to react. The NPC is going to react to that. You don't have to make an intimidation check, right? Mm-hmm. It's situational, context. If you walk in and the person's like, oh, are you here for the money? And you just, okay, don't do anything to me. I'll get you your money. Are you intimidating them? I'm not going to ask you for an intimidation check. You're just saying, I'm going to cross my arms. I'm going to stare at him. Now, if you said, I'm going to stare at him and I'm going to be menacing and I'm going to lean forward like I'm going to hurt him, intimidation check.
Sure.
If you just let him think what he wants to think, if you don't add that emphasis that says I'm doing something, if you just like, I'm intending something, if you're just like, I'm going to let him react to that aspect.
However he would.
But if you, you could just be like, hey, this is a nice shop you have here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. By the way, I'm looking for a sword. Hey, if you're dealing with a meek, like shopkeep, I'm just going to let him react to what he believes you just said.
Right.
But if you're like, okay, I really want to get to this guy. I'm going to do a little bit. I'm going to be nice. When you go out of your way to say you were trying to get that across, that's when I'm going to make it a roll, right? Because I do believe there's a difference between acting and knowing. And granted, I always have, like, you're not just going to always be able to get away with not rolling for things. But there are situations, again, context. If the context makes sense, I'm not going to have you roll. Why would I, when the context makes sense that he can infer what you mean? You're not trying to intimidate him. You're just doing something that is intimidating.
Yeah.
Two completely different things, in my opinion, right?
Very true.
So I may have a big badass NPC who just looks menacing, never talks, stares you down the whole time. You may not want to fuck with that one. You may think he's just there to fuck people up. But behind closed doors, he maybe hate his job. Maybe he's just like, I just want to talk to people. Like, you know how much I like knowing people? Do you know what bakers do every day? Do you know what do you actually understand how many different types of flour there are? Like, imagine that, just the big brute guy that you think is just there to pummel people's heads in, and he just is fascinated with learning everybody else's job. Like, did you know the average blacksmith knows 3 different metals?
That's wild.
Fascinating, right? Do you know that there's alloy? Do you know that metals can be brought together in some like, I would love that. I love those kind of characters and those NPCs because, again, I like breaking away from the expectation. It's so stereotypical with D&D, and I like playing on those stereotypes, but not in the ways you think.
Sure.
I like playing this. I like playing the stereotype of a shopkeep that makes you question whether or not he's a veteran and a retired 20th level, or if he's just meek and just doesn't care about you. Like, burn my house down. What do I care? I'm 80 years old. You know what I mean? Like, but you never know, right? And I like playing with those expectations and people's like mindsets because it's so much fun when you break those expectations. You know what I mean? When you can tell that they're acting a certain way because of something they believe is happening, and then they find out that they didn't have to do it at all. It's so much fun when you can see their character break character.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It's like, what the fuck happened?
Yeah, it's like the inception of their character finally realizes, like, oh, I don't have to do any of that. Oh, you're actually totally cool.
Wild.
So yeah, that's kind of how I like to do things. And yeah, kind of just going back to our primary conversation here. I think that's kind of, this is a good example. Like, Enchanting is a good example of, again, the ways that the game has been stripped away from some of its foundations, from its old school foundations, to make it easier, to make it more approachable. But in some ways, they've taken away the enrichment, right? Like, they've taken away that not just the customization, but that whole process.
Yeah.
That whole half a campaign, those 3, 4, 5 gaming sessions are now boiled down to, just go take that feat. You know?
Yeah, that's fair.
And to me, it's just, where's the gameplay? If the gameplay is me just deciding that I have that feat, where's the gameplay? So, another example of easier to obtain, easier to get into, easier for everybody to understand, but loses a little bit of the enrichment.
Yeah.
So take that for what
Fair
you will,
enough.
chat.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, I think that's going to be us for the rest of tonight. That brought us well past the 3-hour mark. I think that's going to be pretty good. What do we got going on Monday?
Monday, let's take a look at our schedule. I'm pretty sure we are updated in the Discord, if I'm not mistaken. And yes, we have Pokeniners, Artificer subclass, the Appraiser.
Oh, nice. I like that one. The Artificer is so interesting as an appraiser. I'm really curious how that's going to roll out.
It's very interesting. I just finished doing some updates for it that he gave me.
Nice.
And so we should be good to go on the most current copy of that, and see what he's got for us, see how he flavors appraising. Like, I will say, I've seen the image and I've got kind of an idea of what he means, what direction he's going for it. But we'll see come Monday. We'll see.
I like this. Cool. So we'll do that. I don't have any plans to stream this weekend, but I might. I did a cooking stream yesterday.
Yeah, I'm pretty sad well. I missed that.
People liked it, so I think I'm gonna start doing like little pop-ups like that now. I mean, I have enough like stands and stuff for my phone and whatnot. Like, I can just kind of pop up, and I don't have to do the laptop and the multiple cameras
anymore. Yeah.
Like, it is nice, like, you know, in the tavern and stuff to have all of the nice equipment, but I can really just pop on the phone and just kind of roll with it. So I'll probably do some more of that. I'll probably do some gaming stream this weekend. I got some work. I got some family stuff for Super Bowl Sunday.
Nice.
So I'll be with family. So if I'm available, I'll be on tomorrow. You're now streaming on Tuesdays.
Yes.
So go catch him if you guys can. We'll be back on Monday. So I hope you guys had a great week. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend ahead of you. Real quick though, this is going to be a small tangent. We'll have to talk about this later. Because unfortunately no one's here and no one's ever going to see the final tangent at the end. But a really cool idea that you just gave me that I want to like explore later is you were talking about like an artificer and the appraiser, and you were the way that you were like leaning into, you know, what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And it's suddenly a unique idea about because you know how you have like half caster, full caster. What if you had one like below that, where it wasn't like, I'm trying to think of the proper name, like call it like an innate caster, right? Okay. So you have full caster, half caster, innate caster. Half caster, full caster means they have spells they can have, right? Full list, half list. What if you had a class like an innate caster that couldn't have any magic of their own, but they could maybe I don't know how to make this make sense, but they could either sense or feel magical potential in certain items, and therefore certain items could say represent certain magical effects that they could pull out. So nobody else could where an artificer could make an item, they could take one of those pieces and like actually do magic with that item, but use up the magic that's in it. So
kind of like your sorcerers do in High Point.
Almost like my component sorcerer, but without having to build it first. So it's like they can just like collect magical items, almost kind of like their spell slots, but I don't know how it would work because I don't know how you would balance it. But the idea that you could basically pull out a spell out of an item, but the item and what you get is kind of randomized almost.
Right.
But it just makes me think artificer, appraiser. I'm thinking like magical appraisal, like being able to pick up an item and know like what it has in it, like its potential.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking like, man, imagine a magic user that could feel potential and just rip that potential out and then use that for a spell. That would be fascinating.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Okay.
I'd love to dive into that.
Oh, that's going to be on another stream. All right, everybody. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. For those of you who showed up, Hoylepa, Hecate, Soul, thank you all for just jumping in. Or Red Lego, not Hecate, Red Lego. Thank you so much for being here. But we will be out for the rest of the night. Be back on Monday. Hoylapa, thank you so much for showing up. We always appreciate you. Glad that you enjoyed the stream.
Definitely.
But yeah, if anybody, I did not stream on YouTube, so if you want to check out the cooking stream, it'll be live 7 a.m. Get some coffee. But yeah, the cooking stream will be live on Twitch for another week before it goes away. So go make sure to watch that, because those will probably only be Twitch exclusives, because trying to stream to both YouTube and Twitch on my phone is probably just not going to work. So I will probably just do like the cooking streams.
I will
may
say
just be Twitch officials.
There's a couple of streams that, like, whenever I stream on my PlayStation, that's only ever straight on Twitch, but I always download it and re-upload it to my
Maybe I will
YouTube
do that. Maybe I'll
later.
do that if I have time this weekend.
Just for my own sake, because I need an archive.
Yeah, I do kind of. I mean, I did talk a little bit about D&D. Maybe it would be. Maybe I'll upload it to YouTube. We'll find it. Maybe I'll do that this weekend. Anyway, we're gonna get out of here. Thank you all so much. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend ahead of you. Cheers.
Deuces, my friends.